Asterisk. Today marks the 4th anniversary of the day the world nearly ended. Asterisk. Across the Federal Republic of America, superhumans stood together to honor the fallen. Those lost in the chaos of the Anima invasion and the legendary sacrifice of a single man who changed everything. Asterisk. We remember King, the strongest superhuman, who gave his life so that humanity could rise again. Let us never forget the price that was paid, nor the hope that was born in the darkest hour. We faced annihilation and survived, not because we were strong, but because we stood together. That unity must never falter. Asterisk. Mark, there you are. A sharp voice rang through the empty hallway. Erit stomped around the corner, her black eyes blazing. You're late again. I told you the teacher was going to kill me if you skipped class, and you still ran off. What am I, your babysitter? Tall, curvy, and impossible to ignore, Erit was the class president of 2A. Her long blonde ponytail bounced as she stormed toward the slouched figure sitting in their hidden hideout behind the unused wing of Nature Academy. Her uniform, black skirt, snug shirt, and tailored blazer, accentuated her figure, but the thin scar trailing down her cheek gave her a wild, untamed edge. Erit was used to attention. Boys practically lined up to breathe the same air as her. But none of that mattered, because the only person who truly got under her skin was sitting on the ground, yawning like he hadn't a care in the world. Mark Vanitas looked up lazily, stretching before flashing her a smile. His messy black hair, loosened tie, and half-worn uniform screamed troublemaker, but he wore it with an effortless charm. Hey, Erit. Looking stunning as always, he said with a wink. Did you do something different with your hair? Took you longer than I expected to find me this time. Erit flushed crimson. Shut up. You skipped 3 times this week. Do you want me to drag you to class by the ears? Mark shrugged. Only if I get a lap pillow afterward. Mark, be serious. She stomped her foot, red-faced and fuming. Mark grinned, then sighed and rose to his feet, sliding his phone into his pocket. But Erit had caught a glimpse of the video he'd been watching, and her anger dimmed. It was the annual memorial, footage of the Armageddon, the battle that had changed the world. For years ago, monstrous creatures called Anima appeared out of nowhere, abominations of nature, twisted hybrids of man and beast. They tore through cities, shrugging off bullets, missiles, even tanks like they were nothing. For a time, humanity stood helpless until the first superhuman appeared. No one knew his real name. No one saw his face, but the world called him king. His strength turned the tide. He gave people hope. And in the battle that followed, one that lasted 2 days and 3 nights, he destroyed the Armageddon-class Anima at the cost of his own life. The explosion from that clash shattered the landscape, drawing North and South America so close together that they unified into one continent, the Federal Republic of America. That was the day the world changed. More superhumans began to emerge. Individuals blessed with incredible power, each one different. Some could lift buses, others punch through buildings. They became humanity's frontline defenders. But not everyone believed they were heroes. Certainly not Erit. Mark respected superhumans, idolized them even. But Erit? She loathed them. Her hate wasn't baseless. 3 years ago, she'd been caught in an Anima attack at a corporate convention her father was attending. Her parents were crushed in the chaos. She lay buried under rubble, her cries muffled, her body broken. But the superhumans who arrived didn't help her. They prioritized the rich, the executives, and VIPs, leaving the rest to die. By the time Erit was pulled out, her mother was already dead. Her father barely survived. Erit lived, scarred and bitter, not just on her cheek, but in her heart. To her, superhumans were just elite thugs with powers. Heroes in name only. Mark never blamed her. He understood her pain, even if he didn't share her views. Still, the way she always came to find him, even when he skipped class, even when she pretended to hate it, he smiled again. Maybe not all heroes wore capes. Some wore school uniforms and yelled a lot. You're watching the memorial again? Erit's voice was quieter this time, her gaze shifting to the window beside them so Mark wouldn't see the conflicted look on her face. Mark shrugged. Yeah, still airing the tribute. Did they show the statue of King? She asked, pretending to sound casual, even though her tone betrayed a flicker of interest. Despite her disdain for most superhumans, Era had always made an exception for King, the only one she truly respected. His sacrifice, even she admitted, was beyond reproach. A massive statue of King stood tall at the heart of the city, a symbol of resilience. Era often paused by it in silence whenever she passed that way. Not yet, Mark replied. They're repairing it. Remember that fight last week? One of the arms got knocked off. They're reattaching it. Eric gave a small nod, barely noticeable, before snapping back to her usual fiery self. Anyway, enough of that. Let's go. The teacher's going to hang you by your ears if you're late again, and this time, I won't save you. She spun around with a huff and started walking toward their classroom. Despite her tough words, she knew she couldn't blame Mark for watching the memorial. He admired superhumans. She didn't. But it wasn't her place to tell him what to believe. That's not what friends do. Mark shoved his hands into his pockets and followed her, a small smile tugging at his lips. She said she wouldn't come looking for him again, but he knew better. Arid always came, because no matter how much she scolded, she cared. Ring, 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 asterisk, asterisk. Mark stopped mid-step. His phone buzzed, and as he checked the screen, Eric glanced over her shoulder, shooting him a look that could melt steel. He raised a hand in surrender. Hold on. It's important. The caller was Pat, his other best friend, a boy he'd known since kindergarten. Pat had skipped several grades and was now studying cosmology at one of the top universities in the city. Genius-level intellect, zero patience, and a personality as sharp as broken glass. / where are you? Never mind, I've got your location. There's an anima attack, 2 kilometers north of your school. Closest response team's nearly an hour out. Can you make it? The voice was quick and clinical, laced with a trace of superiority that Pat never bothered to hide. Mark's expression changed instantly. He looked out the window, scanning the skyline. I'm with Eric. Pretty sure she wants to murder me right now for making us late. He took a cautious step away from her. How many? Eric stood, tapping her foot furiously. She dragged Mark once before and nearly dislocated her shoulder. He was like dead weight when he didn't want to move. So now, she just waited, barely containing her annoyance. / you still haven't told her you're superhuman? TCH, you two flirt like you're married already. Gross. Whatever. Attack zone's near that huge billboard north of campus. Use it as a landmark. And wait, Pat's voice trailed off as he glanced at the laptop resting on his lap. He was curled up on a massive reclining chair in his apartment, juice box in one hand and fingers typing rapidly with the other. His eyes narrowed as alerts blinked across his screen. Security camera footage, firewalls, warnings. He scoffed. This firewall's pathetic. Who programmed this? A retired dinosaur. Cracking into the city's CCTV system was child's play for Pat. With a few keystrokes, he redirected the feed to the 500-inch wall-mounted screen in front of him. Flash. A blur zipped across the screen. Pat froze the image, eyes sharpening. He zoomed in. Still blurry. He pixelated the frame, applied enhancement filters, then ran a recognition program. The image cleared. A blonde woman in a sleeveless black top and cargo pants. A katana sheathed at her waist. Her golden ponytail danced in the wind as she dashed forward like a streak of light. Pat's eyes widened. No way. He dropped his juice box. Matilda Linesworth, known online and in the superhuman world as Tilda. A high-tier, A-class superhuman and one of the 3 most powerful female fighters in the country. Her nickname, the Yellow Phantom, a nod to her lightning-fast movements and deadly precision. She wasn't even supposed to be in City A. Her base of operations was in another district entirely. Pat leaned back, absorbing the information. Something about this wasn't adding up. Then he spoke again, voice dry. / never mind. It's handled. Tilda's on site. You're off the hook for now, but something's off about this whole thing. Just stay on alert. And for the love of all things logical, don't ignore my calls to flirt with your girlfriend again. Click. The call ended before Mark could say a word. He lowered the phone and blinked. That was fast. Too fast. Normally, it would take emergency responders 30 minutes to get here from the nearest superhuman outpost. But Tilda had arrived in under 3? Mark's brow furrowed. Only A rankers or above had that kind of speed. But all of them were supposed to be deployed elsewhere today. So how was she here? He considered asking Pat for more info, but decided against it. If Pat said, not to worry, it meant he'd already done the math. Still, something about this didn't sit right.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Hey, what is it? You look strange. Did something happen on the phone? Don't tell me you have to leave again, because I'll never forgive you. Erin spoke up as she saw the worried look on Mark's face. She first spoke in a worried tone because she thought that something bad might have happened, and she didn't want Mark to be in any trouble. But once she saw him smile at her in that mischievous way that he always did, she immediately lost all her worry, and she just became annoyed as she shouted at him. He was just too infuriating. Mark moved quickly and grabbed Erin by the waist before pressing her against the wall and smiling down at her. Erin almost felt her heart burst out of her chest once he did this, and she felt her whole face growing hotter as she looked up at him. Mark smiled at her, and Erin suddenly felt like her shirt was too tight. She looked away in embarrassment as Mark's eyes trailed down her body, and she felt like he was eating her with his eyes. You'll never forgive me? I don't think I can agree to that. What would I do without you? Get off me, you bastard. Erin placed her hand against his chest and struggled to push him back in anger. Mark just laughed as he took a step back and gave her some space. Erin's heart was beating a mile a minute, and she had to put her hand to her chest and take deep breaths to stop it. She hates it when Mark teases her like this, and then just laughs about it. There is no doubt that she thought Mark was handsome, and Erin knew that he thought she was beautiful too. They were both attracted to each other, and that was fine. But Erin would never enter a relationship just because of something as shallow as ordinary physical attraction. Erin didn't know how Mark really felt about her, because he was always laughing after doing things like this. He would tease her and pin her against the wall, but then he would just laugh it off like it was nothing. That was not the sort of relationship that she wanted with someone. She couldn't allow someone to play around with her heart like that. Sorry. I got ahead of myself there. You're just too tempting. Mark said this with a kind grin on his face, but his voice was intense and deep, and it made Erin's body tremble. Erin felt great anger fill her as she thought about smacking Mark immediately. This bastard deserved a good beating for the nonsense he always pulled. But she didn't bother doing anything, and she just turned and started to walk back to class. Mark was surprised by her silence, and he wondered if she was really angry this time. He didn't intend to make her this angry. He just couldn't help himself from touching her. Mark was also a superhuman, but unlike other superhumans who came out publicly with their powers and gained publicity and fame after joining a guild, Mark wasn't interested in any of that. He was someone who just fought the good fight every now and then, but he didn't care about money or fame. If there was ever any danger in his surroundings, he wouldn't hesitate to help, but he was not the sort who would want to announce himself to the world. That was the reason why Mark was able to remain anonymous even after fighting against numerous anima for the past 2 years. The news crew and reporters always arrived at the scene of his crime minutes after he leaves, and they would only see the dead body of the anima that he killed. And on the rare occasion when they managed to get a glimpse of him, he was always wearing a mask to cover his lower face. This elusive act has led people to start calling him Ghost Online as a sort of superhero name. Mark didn't really care, and if not for Pat telling him about it, he would never have known. Mark loved Erin, there was no doubt, but he also knew that being together with her would only make her worried about him whenever he went to fight. It would be impossible for them to be in a relationship unless he tells her about his powers. If they were dating, then it would only be a matter of time before she found out. Mark needed freedom of movement to be able to go and fight whenever he wanted to, and he didn't think Erin would understand that. He couldn't bring her into the world of superhumans when he knew that she didn't like superhumans. Hey, what are you doing over there? Are you trying to make me even angrier by staying back? Come on already. The teacher said I should bring you back with me, so you better not make things harder than they need to be. Eric suddenly shouted at Mark from down the hallway, and Mark could only chuckle as he jogged after her with a smile on his face. He shouted loud enough for Eric to hear him as he spread his hands wide to grab her. "Come on, just give me a lap pillow. I promise to be gentle. Just shut up and die." Eric shouted in anger as she ran away from Mark before he could get her. Tilda raced through the containers located at the docks at an unbelievable speed. She could already smell the unmistakable scent of blood in the air, and the screams of the people running away from the docks were getting louder the closer she got. Tilda was in City 8 trying to meet with a friend that she hadn't seen in more than 3 years. But she didn't think that she would suddenly get a ping from her phone that there was an anima attack so close to her location. There were no responders close by, and Tilda knew that it would take some time before the ones further away could get there. So she had to abandon the friend that she planned to meet, and she decided to come here instead. Tilda cursed as she remembered that she also needed to file a report for this attack later. The report would take so fucking long, and no one wanted to do it. If Tilda was a worse person, she would have abandoned all the citizens just so she wouldn't have to write that damn report. Crack! As Tilda reached the port, she screeched to a halt as her feet left long cracks against the ground, and she was shocked to see a monster 3 times as tall as her slamming its large hands into one of the containers, denting it and making a cave-in on itself. The monster then grabbed the container and threw it into a ship that was docked at the harbor with immense strength. Boom! The container crumpled into a twisted shape as it slammed against the wall of the ship, and the ship began to rock back and forth on the water as it tried to gain back its balance. Run away from there. Wait, there's still someone in there. They'll die. You'll die if you don't get out of there right now. Let's go. Arg, wait for me. Help! People were screaming and running away from the monster as they tried their hardest not to get hit by the giant containers that were being tossed around. Tilda waited for just 2 seconds so she could properly assess the situation before she quickly burst into action. Tilda dashed at the giant monster at a slower pace and tried to get its attention. The monster looked like a hybrid of a man, a gorilla, and a fish. It had large hairy arms and feet, but its head was fish-like with giant eyeballs that were staring down at Tilda without even blinking once. Once Tilda got its attention, she raced past the port and tried to get it to follow her. Tilda knew that fighting in this area with all these people here would only cause more damage. Tilda was strong, and she knew that this monster would not be a challenge for her to kill on her own. She was an A ranker, and the monster only looked like a disaster-class beast. There was no need for her to call for reinforcements. Slam! 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 Roar! The beast roared in anger as it slammed its way past multiple containers to try and get to Tilda. But no matter how fast it moved, it just couldn't get her. Even though she was barely moving at her top speed, she was just too fast for it to catch. Once Tilda saw that the monster was far enough from the citizens, she stopped luring it away and quickly turned around. Foom! Shink! The beast didn't even know what happened because at one moment it was trying to slam its way through some containers to get to Tilda, but at the next moment, its arm was missing. The beast screamed in pain as it slammed its body against one of the containers and fell to the ground. The beast couldn't understand what just happened, and it looked around to see where Tilda managed to attack it from. Tilda was standing on top of the opposite container with the beast's hand in one of her hands. Her sword was dripping red blood, and she had a vicious grin on her face as she raised her hand up mockingly. "Are you looking for something, you fat fuck?" Roar! The monster roared in anger as it saw Tilda with its arm. How dare this human mock it? There was no way it would allow her to live. The beast knew that this is not what it was supposed to be doing here. Its mission was to find the boy and bring him back to the leader. But the monster couldn't forgive this woman for what she did. It would first kill this woman, and then it would go and get the boy. The monster could only think in its own way as it charged straight for Tilda again. There was nothing else on its mind other than the thought of killing Tilda. The monster just couldn't understand that Tilda planned all of this from the very start. Tilda knew that mocking the beast would only make it angrier, and that way it would make more mistakes, and she would be able to kill it easily. Tilda dashed straight for the beast again, and her sword gleamed in the sunlight as she leaped over the beast's strike. She slammed her feet into the ground and jumped high enough to slam her feet into the beast's face. Crunch! The ugly face of the beast turned even uglier as blood flew everywhere from Tilda's hit. Tilda didn't allow the disgusting sight to stop her, and she immediately turned around and used the heel of her boot to hit the beast on top of its head. Slam! The beast roared in pain as Tilda's boot left a deep gash on its face, but the pain wasn't enough to make it fall. Tilda's eyes widened as the monster grabbed her by the ankle and threw her against one of the containers. Slam! 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 Tilda slammed through almost 10 containers consecutively, but she managed to right herself just at the right moment as she heard a loud roar from right above her. She looked up in shock, and she saw the monster with its arm raised as it came down on her. Boom! The monster slammed its fist into the ground, destroying the concrete floor for almost 200 meters in all directions. The monster raised its hand up for another hit. It was shocked as it didn't see Tilda's torn and broken form under its hand. Where did she go? Stab! Roar! The monster immediately roared in pain as a sword was stabbed through its right ear and into its head. The monster grabbed onto Tilda and threw her to the ground before holding its ear in pain and stumbling to the side as it lost its balance. Tilda's back slammed into the ground, creating a deep crack that tore into the ground, but she was able to simply get up and roll her shoulders as she didn't feel much pain from the hit at all. The monster was in too much pain to think about really hurting her, so its throw was weak. The monster noticed Tilda walking towards it with her sword held beside her, and it knew that it was going to die there. At this moment of clarity, it suddenly realized that it had made a big mistake by choosing to fight. This isn't what it was supposed to be doing right now. It was supposed to be looking for the boy and sending a message back to the leader. Tum! The monster immediately sent out a large-scale pulse from its gills in a last-ditch effort to try and finish its mission before it died. If it died here, then there would be no point in its life. But if it completed the mission first, then everything would change. The large pulse surprised Tilda, and she immediately put her hand up to her ear as she anticipated a sonic attack of sorts. But she was surprised when nothing happened to her. She brought her hand down and looked at the monster that had essentially given up as it was resting its back against the containers. There was blood leaking from its ear, and whenever it tried to get to its feet, it would stumble and fall back since it didn't have any balance. Tilda could tell that she had won this battle. The monster was screwed. Tilda moved in to finally finish the monster, so she could go and complete the meeting that she came to City A for, but she was shocked when a monster suddenly sat up straighter. Tilda couldn't really explain why, but she could tell that there was an excited look on the monster's face, and she was creeped out by it immediately. What in the world could make a monster look like that? He is here. The boy is here. The monster's entire body was vibrating in excitement as it repeated this phrase inside its head over and over again. It could sense the boy here, and their search was not in vain. It had to get this information to the leader. The monster looked towards Tilda, and it knew that Tilda would not let it escape from here, so it had to come up with another means of getting the information away to the leader. Its body started to vibrate, and Tilda charged forward immediately. She noticed that it was becoming bloated and fat. Tilda didn't know what was happening, but she knew that she couldn't allow the monster to do whatever it wanted to do. There was probably something she was missing here, and she would try to think about it later, but for now, she had to kill this monster no matter what. Whoa! Tum! The monster released a large shout as its body continued to enlarge until a strange creature shot out from its back, with a strange sound like a water cannon. The creature shot straight towards the sea, and before Tilda could even think about killing the creature, it had already entered the sea and swam away from them. Tilda could only watch in slight fear as the creature shot through the water like a torpedo, going towards an unknown place. Tilda couldn't even run that fast if she tried to, so she knew there was no chance of catching the creature. Where was it going, and what was it trying to do? Tilda looked down at the monster on the ground to see that it had a bloody smile on its face as it simply sat on the floor, waiting for death. It looked like it had accomplished its one goal, and there was nothing more it needed to do in life. There was no need to leave it alive, so Tilda just put it out of its misery. She flicked her sword to the side after she was done and looked out into the ocean curiously, wondering what the hell was happening. Ring, ring, ring. Tilda's phone began to ring, and she picked it up once she recognized the caller ID. The person on the other end of the phone was her handler from the Phoenix Guild that she worked under. She was an E-rank superhuman in charge of handling the papers and press conferences that Tilda had to do. Her name was Riri. Tilda, I heard you want to go and fight against a monster. What were you thinking? You're in another city, and the paperwork is going to be crazy. They might even make up a signed affidavit because of you. You should have called for help from someone who was in the area. Tilda put her phone away from her ear the moment that Riri started screaming, and she winced at how loud it was. Riri was always so loud, and she spoke at a speed of 4 words a second when she was really angry. Tilda could bet that that speed was some sort of world record. Tilda knew that coming here to fight would be a problem, but Riri didn't have to deafen her because of it. Calm down, Riri. I spoke to the mayor, and he said it was fine. We only have to deal with about 70% of the usual paperwork. It's still a lot, but just live with it. Something strange happened here. Once Tilda said this, Riri forced herself to calm down and listen. Tilda hardly ever spoke in such a serious tone, and Riri knew that there must be something really serious if she was talking like this. Riri was still irritated that Tilda thought 70% of the paperwork wasn't a lot, but since this situation sounded so serious, Riri was willing to let her anger go for now and listen. Riri asked what was wrong, and Tilda looked down at the monster she just killed as she narrated what happened to Riri. Riri was left stunned as she heard about how the monster allowed itself to be killed after sending a part of itself into the sea. What in the world was the meaning of that? Do you think it means anything? It's possible it just wanted to send its child out so the child could grow. Or maybe that is its real body. Tilda immediately shot down that idea once Riri said it. She would have known if that was the real body because this body would not be able to function without that one. And who would send out their child in that way? It almost looked like the monster was sending out a sentry. Or even worse, a messenger. That thing could have been a messenger that is taking a message back to another place. There's something strange going on here, and I don't like it. I want you to send some reinforcements. I'm not sure if my hunch is right, but if it isn't, then I'll reimburse them for the wasted time. Just send anyone above C rank that the guilds in this city can spare. Riri was stunned again. Is the situation really that serious? Tilda didn't say anything more, and she just cut the call after telling Riri what she needed to say. Tilda then jumped to the top of a tall container overlooking the sea and sat down on top of it before placing her sword across her lap as she watched the ocean. This was how she would remain for the next 12 hours straight. Tilda was trained in how to use the sword, and she was already a swordswoman before even becoming a superhuman. She understood the importance of being able to stay still for a long time, and she was willing to stay here for as long as it took, so she wouldn't allow her ignorance to cost the people of this city anything. The next day, Mark woke up in a large bed as the first rays of light came through his curtain. Mark sighed and sat up in bed before getting off in one fluid motion. His well-toned and muscular body was on display as he only wore boxers to go to sleep, and as he stretched, his muscles rippled and tensed along with him. He walked towards his walk-in bathroom, brushed his teeth, and took his bath before coming out and starting to prepare for school. Ring, ring, ring. Mark's phone rang as he was trying to put on his trousers, and he picked it up without even bothering to look at the caller ID. He already knew who it was. There was only one person who would even think to call him this early in the morning. Don't you sleep? How can you be calling me this early in the morning and expect me to answer you? On the other side of the call, Pat's haughty voice hummed as the sound of clacking from a keyboard could be heard. Pat completely disregarded what Mark said, and he didn't bother to answer. Mark should know by now that Pat was not like all those other normies. Pat did his best work when he was awake from 9 at night to 10 in the morning. That was the time when world changers did their own work. From how fast Pat was typing, Mark knew that he was probably playing an online game or something. The idiot would always stay up late claiming that he was doing world-changing work, but he was only playing online games all the time. Mark could only wonder how Pat was able to do everything he did and still have time to play so many games. Pat spoke up from the other end of the phone in that same broad and haughty tone that he always used. I have something about that attack I called you for yesterday. Turns out the Yellow Phantom took care of it easily. She managed to minimize the casualties, and they only need to repair the docks for them to continue operations now. But there's something strange about all of this. Yellow Phantom never left the docks after killing the monsters. In fact, I can still see her sitting on one of the containers right now. Pat turned his head towards the adjacent scene beside his gaming screen and narrowed his eyes at the image of Tilda sitting perfectly still on one of the containers and looking towards the sea. Pat did not know what she was doing, and he didn't understand why she was still there. The only thing he could do was wait for her to do something, so he would know more. Mark raised a brow in surprise as Pat told him about the Yellow Phantom. What was Yellow Phantom still doing at the docks? There was no need for her to stay there since Pat said she had taken care of the monster already. Was she injured? No, that isn't possible. I don't think she would be injured by a monster that she could kill this easily. There is no reason for her to stay there unless she thinks that there is still another monster. You think there's something bigger going on? Maybe she saw another monster somewhere, and she is waiting for reinforcements while making sure the monster doesn't leave her sight. Mark could only think that there was something they were missing. They didn't have the full story, so they would never know what was really going on unless they asked Yellow Phantom herself. Bang! Mark, are you still in bed? We have to get to school soon. Why are you not dressed? Mark, are you still in bed? We have to get to school soon. Why are you not dressed? Mark's door burst open, and Eric came through it with all the bravado of someone who was entering their own house. Eric was wearing her school uniform already, but she also had an apron tied around her neck, and Mark couldn't stop his eyes from roaming over her body to appreciate her figure. Mark had no idea how she could be so sexy. Her breasts were literally trying to tear that apron apart. When Eric came into the room, she saw Mark was undressed, and she shouted at him in mortification. How could he still be undressed at this time? Mark was only wearing his boxers, and his trousers were not even put on properly. To Eric, Mark was basically naked. Eric always told Mark to get dressed at this time so that they could eat together. Mark could never get used to how easy it was to embarrass Eric. With how much bravado she had when she was doing anything, you would think she was the sort of person who never got embarrassed. But yet, she could never bear to see him naked, even if he was only wearing boxers. Mark still remembers the one time that he walked in on Eric when she was taking her bath. He was only wearing a towel because he also wanted to take a bath, and he just didn't check if she was in the bathroom before entering. The scream that followed that incident almost made him go deaf. Eric and Mark both live together in a 2-bedroom apartment close to their school. They have lived together for almost 2 months now, but she was still so innocent about them seeing each other in any state of undress at all. The only reason why they were able to get this apartment together was because of Eric's dad. Eric's dad was a businessman who worked overseas and was always busy. After the incident that ended up claiming Eric's mother's life, there was no way Eric's dad would leave her alone in America to travel for business. At first, he took time off work for a very long time so that he could stay with Eric for as long as he needed to. But he found out that this plan would not work since he had a lot of on-site work to complete. Eric's father didn't want to leave Eric alone in the city, so he allowed Eric to stay with Mark because he trusted Mark to take care of Eric whenever he wasn't around. Eric's father bought the apartment for them and made Mark promise not to allow anyone to harm his daughter when they were together. Of course, Mark agreed to it easily. Mark has been to 3 different high schools in the past 3 years, and after coming to this school, Eric was the only friend that he made. Of course, he wouldn't allow anything to happen to her. Mark knew that the only reason why Eric's father left them together was that Eric's father thought that the two of them were already a couple and he approved of the relationship. Even Eric didn't know about this misconception, but Mark would never forget how Eric's father kept on emphasizing that both of them should always make sure to use protection when they are doing it. Mark made sure Errett never found out about this misunderstanding because he knew that Errett would have a meltdown if she knew her father thought she was already having sex. The girl couldn't even look at his bare chest, so Mark knew that sex was far from her mind. Mark hummed as this thought crossed his mind, and he realized that maybe sex wasn't so far from Errett's mind after all. You know what they say about the shy ones? They're usually the freakiest in bed. Also, if Mark didn't stay with Errett, then the only other option he had was to stay with Pat. It didn't matter how desperate he was. Mark was never staying with that crazy bastard. Is that the wife? What is wrong with you fucking normies? You're already going at it this early? You should calm down a bit, Mark. You know you're still in high school, so make sure you're using protection. Errett got redder and redder as she heard Pat talking through the phone, and Mark noticed that she was about to start shouting at Pat in anger. Mark chuckled at the look on her face as he cut Pat off. We'll talk later, all right? Try to watch that situation closely and find out if there's anything out of the ordinary. Call me then. Mark clicked the call off and raised a brow once he looked at Errett. She was just too easy. Did she really get flustered just because of that? She already knew what sort of person Pat was, and she knew that he was only playing around. Errett was still not looking at his chest, and she went and grabbed his shirt from the bed and threw it at him before telling him to put it on. They would be late for school if he didn't start changing soon. You know this is my room, right? I shouldn't have to worry about putting my clothes on when you're the one that barged in here. I mean, you didn't seem shy at all when you came in here like that. So why are you acting all shy now? Just put on already. We're going to be late if you don't hurry. I made some food for you, so come down and get it before we go. Errett hurried out of the room in embarrassment after throwing the shirt on Mark. Mark just chuckled and put his shirt on before he grabbed his tie and backpack and began to walk out of the room to get some food. A feeling of contentment filled his body as Mark got to the main dining room of the house and saw the feast prepared on the table. Errett was wearing the housewife apron as she carried a large pot of spaghetti and placed it right in the center of the table. At that moment, Mark thought that there was nothing more that he could ask for in life. He had everything that he needed to live a good life right here in front of him. However, Mark also knew that there was something missing, something big, because no matter how amazing this life was, it felt like a part of him was not complete. The reason for this was simple. Mark glanced at the side of his vision and brought up his system notification tab as he saw the notification that was present there. System functions permanently disabled. To enable, please meet the necessary conditions. Mark couldn't stop the feeling of anger that filled his heart as this message appeared. Mark has never told anyone about this, but his power was not something as simple as super strength as everyone thought. When Mark manifested his blessing, it came in the form of a system that would allow him to live his life like a video game. But there was something else that happened that day. There was a boy named Sozin who appeared before Mark the day that he got his system. Sozin introduced himself as the god of games, and he told Mark that he was choosing Mark to be his sole champion. At that time, Mark was only 14 years old, so, of course, he was excited about it. There were no such things as superhumans yet, and Mark thought that he was just going to get a system that he could use to do whatever he wanted. After all, Mark has read many stories about systems in light novels and how the user used them to become great overnight. Surely things would not be different with Mark. But immediately after he got his system, that was when the first Armageddon appeared in this world. When the apparition occurred, Mark was living with his parents on the richer side of the city. Mark couldn't even begin to understand what was happening when his parents suddenly came and grabbed him to put him in a car and started to run away from the area. The Armageddon appeared very close to their house, and his parents were trying their best to preserve their lives by running away from there. But there was no way to run away from an Armageddon with only a flimsy car. The Armageddon got to them faster than they ever imagined, and it destroyed the road and all the cars that were trying to run away together with nothing but one swing. The car Mark and his parents were in flipped more than 10 times, sending both Mark and his parents flying through the air and slamming into a large building at the other side of the road. Mark crawled out of the car with many red warnings flashing in his system. He had only just gotten the system, so he had no idea what all those warnings meant. The only things that he could see over and over again were, user has suffered a major injury to his right leg. User has suffered a major injury to his hand. User has suffered a concussion. User has suffered 3 broken ribs. Mark couldn't breathe. He couldn't walk. And he couldn't even raise his hand up to ask anyone for help. He was just lying there wondering why his life was such a shit show of bad luck. He looked to the side to see if his parents had also survived the crash, but there was no way that would be possible. The only reason why Mark managed to survive after an accident like that was that he was a superhuman. His body was much stronger than a human's, and that was what gave him the strength to not be crushed immediately when the car hit the wall. At that time, Mark prepared to die against Armageddon since he knew that there was no way for him to gain strength quickly enough to fight against this monster. But then time seemed to slow down until it stopped as a playful-looking little boy appeared before Mark. Sozin, the god of games, was wearing blue shorts and a red top, and he had a cute hat on his head that covered his white hair. The boy laughed as he looked down at Mark's broken and torn form. "Are you really so pathetic? How did my champion end up like this less than 24 hours after getting his system? You would think that you were blessed by the god of bad luck or something." Mark felt irritation fill him as he heard the little boy say this. But he couldn't retort because he knew that the boy was right. It was only bad luck that would allow someone to face a monster like this only 24 hours after gaining the power to do anything you wanted. The boy laughed for a few more minutes before he finally sobered up and looked up at the monster standing over Mark. It was a huge monster as tall as a skyscraper. It had a dragon-like body, but it didn't have any wings, so it could only slowly walk through the city, crushing everything in its path and spewing fire over the mass. If it was something like this, then it was definitely possible. The boy grinned down at Mark playfully. "Hey, champion, you want to play a game? A really fun game." Mark was surprised by the request, and he could only stare at the boy as he wondered what he was talking about. Did this bastard think that Mark was in any condition to play a game right now? Look at how Mark was bloody and broken. Who can play a game in this state? It seemed like the boy could read exactly what Mark was thinking as he just chuckled and playfully floated into the air. He picked up a small pebble on his way up and held it in front of Mark. "It's a fun game, I promise. Nothing too extravagant. You see, I want to help you, I really do. But I can't just go around giving help to my champion when the other gods aren't allowed to do it either. So I have to give you a fair chance at winning and losing. If you can win against me, then I'll grant you the power you need to win against that monster. Of course, terms and conditions apply. I can't just give you power without getting anything in return for it. So I'll be taking something from you as well." Mark could only think that the god of games sounded like a shitty salesman with a pitch like that. Mark was always told by his parents never to trust strangers who try to sell him things. But this situation was different. He was not going to die here. He needed the power that this god was selling him. So Mark could only nod and agree to the game. And the god of games laughed happily as he threw the stone up and caught it with both hands behind his back. He brought his 2 hands forward as closed fists and gave Mark a sharp look. "Tell me where the stone is in 10 seconds, and you win the game. If you can't find where the stone is in that time, then time will start moving forward again, and I'll leave you to be scorched by the monster over there. You have exactly 10 seconds. 10, 9, wait, what? What the hell is a game like this?" Mark was stunned by how archaic the game was. He thought that there would be something more intense since this was the god of games, but it was just a shitty guessing game. Mark was expecting to have to play a PlayStation or even a gotcha pull. That meant that Mark had a 50% chance of both winning and losing here. If he gave the right answer, then he could gain a lot of power, but if he gave the wrong choice, then he would die here, and that would be it. Mark was filled with dread as he began to look between the 2 hands with wide, desperate eyes as he tried to find the one that was a more sensible choice. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. The time continued to count down like thin, and Mark's desperation only continued to grow as he looked from one hand to the other. There was no way that he could pick out one of the hands and be sure of his answer. He was about to just choose any of them and hope that it was the right answer. But then Mark remembered what the god of games said at the start of the game. He really wanted Mark to win, but he just couldn't give Mark something for free. That meant that there was a 100% chance of Mark winning this game if he really thought about it. The god of games wouldn't give such a game to someone that he wanted to lose. There was something involved in this game that was a fail-safe to make sure that if Mark was smart enough, then he could win 100% of the time. Tell me where the stone is. The boy's teasing voice rang through the area again, and Mark caught another thing in his voice that immediately told him that his hunch was right. The god of games was cheating, and Mark knew exactly how to catch him. 3, 2. The stone isn't in your hands at all, is it? Once Mark said this, the god of games stopped counting and looked at Mark with a surprised expression on his face. For a moment, Mark thought that he had chosen the wrong option, and he was about to start crying. But then the god of games allowed his face to split into a twisted smile that made his entire face look like a jackal. A chuckle came out of his mouth as he started to laugh loudly in amusement. The god of games couldn't believe that Mark managed to guess something like that. Who would even think of such an option in such a dangerous situation? The god of games opened both of his hands, and Mark's heart soared as he saw that both hands were empty of the stone. The god of games then opened his mouth and brought out the stone with his tongue. That was some damn good guessing skills. You keep on making me prouder with everything you do. I can now agree that you weren't the wrong choice at all when I was picking my champion. You know, the other gods chose many champions all at the same time. They wanted many people to worship them all at once, but I was the only one who could choose only one. You're the only one I have as my follower, and I do not regret that choice one bit. You're more than worthy to be my champion, Mark Vanitas. Dune. Mark felt a strange power begin to fill his entire body as his heartbeat surged in excitement. He could feel his injuries closing and his bones snapping into place as he was forced to his feet by the sheer intensity of the power that was surging through his body. Mark has never felt anything like this in his life. He felt like he could take on the entire world and win with how much power he had in his body. Was this the gift that the god of games spoke about? User has been granted administration control. User has gained full access to system abilities. User lacks the constitution required for full access. A temporary constitution will be granted. Accessing heavenly immortal constitution. Unable to access constitution. User lacks the constitution required for full access. A temporary constitution will be granted. Accessing demonic dragon constitution. Unable to access constitution. User lacks the constitution required for full access. A temporary constitution will be granted. Recalibrating. Accessing soldier and constitution. Constitution accessed. Temporary constitution granted. Superhuman system. Name, Mark Vanitas. Race, human. Level max. Strength max. Stamina, max. Agility, max. Durability, max. Mana, infinite. Affiliation, true good. Due to administration control, the user has been granted temporary full access to 2 skill trees. Skill tree, dash, full body constitution. This is a unique skill tree enabling users to systematically enhance and fortify every aspect of their physical form, elevating strength and resilience to unprecedented levels. Current full body constitution, soldier ant constitution, max/max. Soldier ant constitution. This skill endows the user with the ability to enhance their physical strength to levels proportionate to that of a soldier ant, enabling them to exhibit power that is 10 times higher than their current physical capability. Dash mana circulation. Mana circulation is a skill enabling the user to enhance the efficiency of mana distribution throughout their body, optimizing energy flow for heightened senses and greater strength. Current mana circulation stage. Phantasmal rank. Comment from GOG. You think you have strength, but don't get too cocky. One mistake and your entire body could explode from the overload. The god of games was silent, but he still had that look of pleasure on his face as he watched Mark slowly rise to his feet. Mark raised his hands and looked at them both as he could see a black substance leaking from all the pores in his body. The substance smelled disgusting, and it had a feeling like tar when Mark touched it. Are these impurities? Mark could feel that his whole body was becoming stronger the more these impurities left him, and the surge of power inside of him just got higher and higher. You should feel the surge of power rushing through you right now. I have decided to help you since you played the game so expertly. There will be a time limit to how long your power will last, and there will be consequences, but you will possess the full might of your system as of this moment. The only thing I will tell you is that you should not go beyond what your body is capable of withstanding. I cleared out the impurities in your body and made you stronger, but your body is still too weak to handle the full might of your system's abilities. The strength, speed, and agility will tear your body apart if you take it too far, so exercise caution. The god of games immediately started to float away once it said this, and Mark quickly called out to him and asked him to wait. Mark needed to know what was going to be taken from him for this power. The god of games said that there would be consequences for him getting this power, so there was no way that Mark would not want to know exactly what sort of consequences he would face. What is going to happen to me? You said there will be terms and conditions, right? What are they? I know you won't just give me all of this for free. The god of games only gave a small smile in return as he muttered something that shocked Mark down to his core before he disappeared into thin air and vanished from Mark's sight. Free? Of course, it is not for free. This is for my entertainment, mortal. Everything done by everyone in this world is only for our entertainment. But you should try to finish this fight as quickly as you can, because the longer you fight, the more you sacrifice your future potential. Sizzle. Mark suddenly came back to reality as he heard the sound of meatballs sizzling on the fire, and Art hurried to grab them off and brought them to the table before putting them beside the spaghetti. Mark sighed as he took his eyes away from the screen that had haunted him with the same message for more than 4 years now. Ever since that day, Mark has tried everything he could to wake the system up, but nothing works. Mark did everything that he has seen characters in light novels do. He trained, he meditated, and he even went to really dangerous places to try and see if the system needed him to be in danger before it could wake up. But all he ended up doing was putting himself in danger for no reason. Try to wake up the system was the entire reason why he even started fighting against Anima in first place. He thought that he could wake up the system by collecting stat points from killing Anima and passing some mysterious threshold. But after some time, Mark realized that this was also a waste of time. Now, he just fights against the Anima because he feels it is the right thing to do. Even though Mark doesn't have a system, he is still as strong as a rank using only his regular human strength. It was now that Mark really understood what the god of games meant when he said that Mark would be burning his future potential. Fighting against Armageddon was something that Mark could not regret because that bastard took away his parents from him. It had to pay, and Mark also knew that if he didn't do it, then the entire world would have crumbled and been destroyed. But in exchange for that, Mark gave up his blessings, and it really sucked. Mark had no blessings, and he also had no power. He was basically fighting against the Anima, using nothing but pure physical strength from his superior body. With only this superior body, Mark could handle disaster-class Anima with some effort. That was enough for him to take care of many of the stray Anima that appeared around his vicinity. Mark had no idea how long it would take for him to finally get his system back. He thought that it would have come back by now, but every year that he wishes for it to come back is only another year for him to feel disappointed when it doesn't come back. Mark would rather just stop wishing for something like that if it was only going to end up in disappointment every time. Over time, Mark slowly allowed himself to forget about the god of games and his system, and he began to enjoy the life that he currently had with Aerith. Mark closed the system tab that he opened and moved closer to the table with the food. Once Mark smelled the food, he felt his mouth begin to water immediately. Aerith was an amazing cook. She was probably one of the best cooks that he had ever seen in his life, and there was nothing that she made that Mark could say wasn't the best he tasted. Aerith would always blush and deny that she was a good cook whenever he brought it up, but Mark knew that she was just being humble. She was damn good at cooking, and Mark knew that she wouldn't lose against any of those celebrity cooks that he sees on TV or anime. Aerith noticed how Mark was staring at her food, and she felt a giddy sensation fill her entire body as she tried to hide her smile. Making food like this every morning for them was very hard, and she had to wake up very early to do it. Most people would be completely shocked if they saw the amount of effort she put into waking up early just so that she could cook for Mark. She felt like a housewife trying to please her new husband whenever she did it, and she would always chuckle to herself when she thought about this while cooking. But waking up that early was always worth it whenever she saw Mark looking at her food like that. Mark looked like the food was the best thing that he had ever seen in his life, and she knew that he would finish this entire dish on his own if she gave him the chance. He could eat enough food for 3 people on his own after all. The fact that Mark loved her food so much made her far happier than it should. Erit knew that she wouldn't mind a life where she made food for Mark every morning while he was going out to work. Erit spoke up as she tried to hide her excitement. "What are you doing standing there and watching me? Come sit down and eat before the food gets cold. And why are you still not well dressed? How many times have I helped you with this already? And you still don't know how to knot your own tie?" Mark raised his tie up and shrugged with a smile once she said this, and Erit sighed tiredly. Erit was already walking up to Mark, and she just grabbed the tie from him and began to help him knot it around his neck expertly. Mark was extremely tall, so he basically towered over Erit. The feeling of having Erit hanging off his neck like this and helping him again was something that Mark always enjoyed. Did she really think he didn't know how to knot a tie? Of course, Mark knew how to knot a damn tie. Mark was an expert at knotting a tie. He could tie 10 different styles of knots with his eyes closed and 20 with his eyes open. But he would never tell her that. Why would he want to ruin something as amazing as this by telling her that he could knot his own tie? Mark looked down as he felt Erit's breasts brush against his chest, and he had to force himself to control his little brother's reaction. "You're really beautiful, you know. I keep telling you that, but you never take me seriously." Mark smiled down at Erit as he said this, and he saw a blush rise on Erit's cheek as she finished knotting his tie and flattened it against his chest softly. Mark could see some acceptance flash across Erit's eyes, but she just shook her head and she chuckled slightly before smiling up at him as she spoke. "You tell me I'm beautiful every other day, just like a lot of others. Anybody can say something like that, and I won't know if they're just saying it because they want me for my body or if they really like me. When you're serious, I'll know." Mark could see the longing in Erit's face, and he knew that she was serious about what she said. There was no way she wouldn't accept him if he just pushed her down and kissed her right now. But Mark held himself back and just laughed off their atmosphere again as he started to move towards the table. Mark was still hesitant to bring Erit into the world of superhumans that he lived in. She was just a normal human, and she would never survive if she got into a bad situation from being with him. Mark was being as cautious as possible because he really cared about Erit. He pulled out a seat for Erit and grinned. "Come on then, princess. Let's eat before we get late for school. You wouldn't want to ruin your perfect attendance, would you? I know you're just going to blame it on me if that happens, and I'm not going to take the blame for you making us late." Erit frowned in annoyance as Mark said this before she just sighed and went to join him. She knew that he was holding himself back for some reason, and she was still curious about it. But she wouldn't rush him. She was willing to wait as long as it took for him to tell her what was wrong. And until then, this was enough for her. System functions recovering. Time elapsed. 4 years. 1 day. 10 hours. 32 minutes. 15 seconds. Time remaining. 0. System functions can be awakened. System functions are being recalibrated. System functions are being recalibrated. System awakening dash. Not just yet. Let's calm down a little. /N. I know this will piss some people off, but just wait. I have a surprise waiting for you guys in future chapters. A playful voice laughed jovially as it caressed the system and stopped the system recalibration. The god of games released another joyful laugh as he looked into the possible future and saw something that would be far more entertaining for him. The system could not awaken yet. Not until all the pieces have been put in their right place. System functions temporarily stopped. System awakening paused. All of the system messages that appeared immediately cleared out again before Mark could see them, and a certain god of games laughed with even more mirth as it slowly made itself scarce again. Virum. Mark and Erit were on Mark's Kawasaki Ninja, H2/our motorcycle, as they made their way towards school. The Kawasaki was a gift from Pat on Mark's 16th birthday, and Mark has loved the bike ever since. Mark knew that this Kawasaki breed is the fastest commercial motorcycle in the world, and Mark had no idea how Pat was able to get one as easily as he did. Mark has always believed that Pat had way more money than he knew what to do with. Mark made a lot of modifications to the bike to make it faster and stronger than other Ninja H2/RS, and he uses any excuse he can to ride the bike anywhere he goes. At first, Eric was against riding the bike because of how Mark always rode at a very high speed. Mark was always trying to perform stupid stunts with the bike, and Eric was always scared for her life when she was with him. She was afraid that Mark would put them in an accident one day, and they could both end up dead. But Mark assured her that he would be careful, and he would drive slowly whenever they were together. So she finally agreed for him to take her to school with it. Eric had no idea that Mark only wanted her to ride with him so much because of how tightly she would hold onto him whenever she was on the back of the bike. Mark could feel all her assets pressing against his back, and it was too exciting for him to pass up. If feeling something like that meant he had to ride slower, then he would gladly go ahead and do just that. As Eric and Mark went to school that day, Mark had to stop at a cross-section as he saw a long line of cars moving through the road. They were both shocked to see so many cars moving down the road toward the docks. The cars were all military-grade vehicles with bulletproof windows and large Gatling guns mounted on top of their roof. And everyone knew that these cars were specially created to fight against anima. What was happening? Was there an anima attack? Mark didn't receive any calls from Pat, so he was sure that there were no attacks close by right now. That means that this must have something to do with the attack that happened yesterday. Pat said that the attack was weird and there were a few things that didn't seem right about it. But Mark didn't know that it was this serious. He would have to call Pat later to get some info out of him. Hey, I think that's from the Phoenix Guild. Yeah, look over there. It's Lightning Rider from the Phoenix Guild. He's that B-rank superhuman who fought against the disaster class the other day. What is he doing here? Oh my gosh, it's Lightning Rider. Over here. Look at me. One of the fangirls on the street started to wave erratically as she tried to get Lightning Rider's attention. Lightning Rider only glanced towards her for a second from inside the car before he rolled up the window in annoyance and told the driver to move faster so they could get away from the annoying children. The girl that was screaming shouted happily as she started to gush to her friends on her group chat. That Lightning Rider glanced in her direction. There are a lot of cars. Is this about the attack I saw on TV? They said that there was an attack at the docks, but a superhuman blocked off the reporters and prevented them from getting any pictures because the anima's corpse is still there. Yeah, I heard that too. They said it was Yellow Phantom that killed the monster. I watched a video of the fight on Matube, and she was so cool. But why are so many superhumans from City C doing here? I thought the Phoenix Guild only functions over there. They don't have jurisdiction in City A. The students who were also going to school were all talking about the cars that were passing, and Mark could see that all of them were very curious about what was happening. Mark also found it strange that this many superhumans from City C were coming down to City A, but he didn't stop to gawk like the other students because he wasn't interested in watching the convoy. He needed to find out what was happening over there. There's a chance that there's a big fight coming soon. Eric only looked at the convoy for a few minutes before she looked away without a care in the world. She looked down at her phone to read up on the class that they would be having today, so she would be prepared for any questions from the teacher. Eric didn't care about superhumans, and she wasn't some fangirl who would start gushing over them just because they were passing by. P.E. 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 A loud car horn echoed through the street and startled Eric so much that she almost dropped her phone in shock. Hey, fucker, don't just stay there blocking the way. Get a move on already and let me pass. You think this fucking road belongs to you? Get that stupid-looking bike out of the way now. Someone suddenly shouted from behind Eric and Mark didn't even need to turn around to know exactly who it was. The person was driving a yellow Lamborghini and was shouting loudly in anger, telling Mark to get the hell out of the way. Mark looked back to see one of his seniors in school named Francis. Francis was from Class 3B, and he was the son of one of the richest men in City A. His father owned at least 1/3 of the businesses in the city, and they were far too rich to be considered normal. There was a girl sitting beside Frances in the Lamborghini, and she was busy fixing up her makeup in the car mirror as she ignored what was happening around her. Her name was Esmeralda Fortuna, and she was the second daughter of the Fortuna Entertainment Company president. The Fortuna Entertainment Company was in charge of everything that had to do with media in City A. They handled things like modeling and idol shows, and they were also involved in TV presentations. She was from a very wealthy family, so she knew she didn't have to worry about anything in life. All she had to do was look pretty, and she knew that life would be easy for her. She hung out with Francis because she knew that it would look good on her to be with the son of such a rich family. But she was constantly annoyed at the things that he did. Did he not know that he was bothering her makeup session with his stupid horn? Esmeralda glared at Francis as he pressed the horn again. He just made her make a mistake in applying her lipstick. But she just sighed and looked away. She couldn't do anything to stop Francis when Mark was involved. Francis has hated Mark right from the first time he saw Mark hanging out with Erit. Esmeralda didn't have anything against Mark. In fact, she thought that Mark was very handsome, but she couldn't say that out loud because she would be going against Francis, and that would be bad for the future relations between their two family businesses. So she just allowed Francis to torment Mark anyhow he wanted. Francis has always had it out for Mark right from when Mark started coming to Nature Academy. The reason for this was that Francis had been trying his best to woo Erit right from her first year, and she has never agreed to be friends with him. So Francis was pissed when he saw how Erit and Mark immediately became close when Mark started going to their school last year. Francis considered himself to be better than Mark in every way, so he didn't see any reason why Erit should not like him more than Mark. As far as Francis was concerned, both Erit and Mark were eyesores, and he tried his best to make things difficult for them in any way he could. Mark just ignored Francis and turned back around while tuning out the annoying sound of Francis' voice. He was already used to this nonsense from Francis, and he knew that there was no need to respond because Francis would only start being more annoying if you gave him any attention. P.E. 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 Hey, are you deaf? I said, get the hell out of the way. Don't make me come over there. Francis continued to press his horn even louder, and Erit tightened her hold on Mark's waist as Mark heard her growl deep in her throat in annoyance. Francis could see that there was a convoy of cars moving, yet he was still trying to make it seem like they were wasting his time. Erit could only swallow her anger at the irrational behavior that Francis was showing. She would have gone to reprimand him, but she didn't want to cause a scene on the street. Isn't that car for Francis Colton? What the hell is he doing? Doesn't he know he's disturbing the entire block? Can't you see who's in front of him? Those two have never seen eye to eye before. Oh, it's Mark. No wonder. I wonder what Mark did that pissed Francis off so much. He has had it out for Mark since Mark transferred here. I wouldn't want to be on the bad side of Francis. His family could bury me. People on the street were already talking about how Francis was disturbing everyone by pressing his horn, but he ignored everything they were saying as he continued. P.E. 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 Francis was unrelenting as he constantly pressed the horn over and over again, and Erit could feel Mark tensing in anger as the horn became too annoying to ignore. She knew that he was only a moment away from doing something, but she just hugged him tighter and told him not to. She didn't want him to get involved with Francis either. He knew that Francis' father was rich, and trying to attack Francis would only end badly for them. Finally, the convoy of cars passed, and Francis revved his engine loudly as he raced around Mark and Erit. He brought his hand out of his window as he passed them and flashed them the middle finger before zooming off to school. He's really pushing it. Mark only said this with a deep growl, and Erit just hugged him tight once more to thank him for not causing a scene. She knew that Mark had every justification for his anger, but she just didn't want him to get into trouble with someone as rich and powerful as Francis. It was best to just wait for Francis to graduate from school, and they could finally be free from his stupid antics. Mark revved up his motorcycle and continued on his way to school without bringing up the topic again. He knew that it was pointless getting angry at someone like Francis, who was just a normal human being. Mark had lived as a superhuman for a long time, so he was already an expert at controlling his anger and strength, so he doesn't do anything that would cause too much damage to the people around him. Imagine if he couldn't control his strength and he held Eric too tightly one day. That would be a disaster. So something like this would just roll off his skin after some time. At the docks, the large convoy of cars stopped in front of the large container that Tilda was sitting on, and Lightning Rider came down from his car and jumped up to the top of the container. He looked down at Tilda and saw that she was sitting perfectly still with her eyes closed and her sword resting on her crossed legs. If anyone else saw her, then they would definitely think that she was asleep, but Lightning Rider has seen her in this state too many times to think something so silly. He could tell that she was more alert than anyone when she was like this. "You're late. I called for you 12 hours ago, and it took you this long to get here." Tilda said this as she opened her eyes and released a silent sigh, and Lightning Rider nodded. He didn't have a choice about how long it took them to get here. This wasn't their jurisdiction, and they had to go through a lot of processes to get permission to bring some of their own guild members to this area. If not that Tilda was the one who requested for the reinforcements, then the guild would have never sent these many people to help out because of how annoying all the paperwork is. Lightning Rider was a tall, lanky man with large dark circles under his eyes and a gloomy disposition that would make anyone think he was clinically depressed. He wore a white shirt and trousers and had an extendable pole attached to his lower back. His main power was his ability to summon and channel lightning through his body because of his minor blessing from Zeus, the god of lightning and storms, and the pole he had was something that he used to increase his channeling ability to transfer as much lightning as possible into his opponent. We are not exactly sure why you called all for us here, though. I heard Riri say something about you having a bad premonition, but that was all she said. What is really going on? I think we'll find out soon. I don't know what it is, but I just have a bad feeling. A bad feeling? Lightning Rider looked at all the superhumans and soldiers that had come here with him, and he knew that they would all think that it was unnecessary to summon this much firepower just because someone had a bad feeling. It was like trying to kill an ant with a hammer. But for superhumans, the case was different. Just having a bad feeling was more than enough reason to be wary. We'll be on standby then. There shouldn't be too many people around, but I'll tell them to set up a perimeter around here so that nothing will get past us. There's a school nearby, and if we start fighting here, then they will definitely get involved as well. Lightning Rider was someone who didn't like interacting with others unless it was very necessary, but Tilda knew that she could trust him to look after the citizens. He was not as strong or as fast as she was, but he was fast enough to get anyone out of trouble if the fight became too intense. Lightning Rider cared about us citizens, and that he wouldn't want to cause too much damage to the city, so there wouldn't be any casualties. Fine then, I'll leave it to Dune. A monster appeared in front of them. Before Tilda could get out her response, she was immediately jumping backward with wide eyes, because right in front of her was a monster that just jumped out of the ocean and came straight for them. There was not even a single warning before the monster appeared. At one moment, there was nothing, and in the next moment, a monster flashed out of the sea and was already aiming for them. Boom! Ralph! Tilda screamed for Lightning Rider in worry as she watched the monster slam into the spot where he had been standing. But there was a flash of lightning from the dust, and a large lightning bolt struck down on the monster as Lightning Rider managed to dodge at the last moment and avoid the attack. All the superhumans in the area prepared for battle as they began to pull out their weapons as well. The superhumans here were mainly C ranks and a few B ranks. There weren't any other A ranks other than Tilda, and Tilda knew that she would have to take center stage in this fight and draw the monster's attention to her, because it could easily kill the other hunters if they faced it one-on-one. The soldiers that didn't have any power all entered the armored tanks, and they began to move some of the tanks away to create a perimeter around this area, while the remaining tanks aimed their guns right at the monster in front of them. Tilda immediately drew her sword and dashed towards the monster. The monster was a fish-human hybrid, just like the one that Tilda killed before, and Tilda was sure that it would have the same strength as the previous one. It would be hard for the other superhumans to take it on alone, so she would just leave them to handle creating the perimeter while she and Ralph would take care of the monster. Boom! A large explosion resounded through the area as one of the armored tanks shot a blast straight at the monster, disorienting it enough to allow Tilda to get close enough and slam her foot into the monster's face. Slam! The kick threw it back for 50 meters before Tilda jumped after it and struck out with her sword to sever its arm that was trying to hit her. Slash! Squelch! The arm flew off easily, and the monster roared in pain as it was pummeled by 4 more rounds from the armored tanks. Tilda grabbed the arm that she cut and was about to use it to stab down into the monster's neck to end its life. Slam! But before Tilda could get the arm in, the monster used its other hand to slap Tilda away, and she dug a deep crack into the concrete as she slid for more than 100 meters. She flipped and slammed her feet into the ground to stop herself, and she was about to dash back in, but a flash of lightning at her side made her stop in her tracks as she saw Lightning Rider appearing in front of her. "Wait, Tilda. Don't move a muscle. There's something over there." Lightning Rider spoke in a low voice as he stared towards the sea. Anyone who heard him would immediately think that his throat was completely dry from fear. Tilda frowned as she turned in the direction that he was looking in to see what was so important. But Tilda immediately lost her annoyance, and her throat dried up in shock as she saw something that was unbelievable standing in front of the ocean. 5. There were 4 large monsters standing in a straight line in front of the ocean, and in front of them stood a monster that looked more human than any anima that Tilda had ever seen. The anima in front of the 4 large anima had a human-like figure, but its body was purple and bulky, and there were armor-like plates on all its joints. It also had an ant's head, complete with sharp teeth, large eyes, and 2 long antennae. It was almost twice as tall as Lightning Rider, but it had a look in its eyes that screamed intelligence. It was surveying the surroundings with this bored, judgmental stare that reminded Tilda too much of what a human stare would look like. She knew that this monster was different from any other one she had fought against. Once the anima turned to look at Tilda and Lightning Rider, they both took steps back because they could feel the power behind that stare. There was an immeasurable dread that filled both of them, and it almost froze them to their bones. They could immediately sense that this monster was something that they would not want to ever challenge to a fight. This had to be a high disaster class monster. No, that was even too low. The monster in front of them had to be a calamity. It was a country-level calamity. Tilda's hand shook as she tried to grip her sword tighter. She couldn't show fear here, not when she was the strongest one here. If she showed fear, then what will the others do? On my signal run, you need to call for reinforcements. Send out a message to all the guilds. Tell them a calamity is here. Tilda muttered through gritted teeth as her hand tightened around her sword. At that moment, Tilda knew that there was nothing any of them could really do against this monster, and they were all going to be killed if they didn't do something fast. The best they could hope for was for Lightning Rider to send out a message to all the guilds and get them to bring their ranks here. Screech! The ant suddenly released a loud screech in the direction of the 2 superhumans, and Tilda gave up on staying quiet as she screamed at Lightning Rider to get out of there now. They had no idea what the ant was trying to do here, but they knew that standing there would only end with them dead. Lightning Rider dashed away from the spot that they were standing in, and in the next moment, he saw 2 of the 4 larger monsters appear in front of him. His eyes widened, and his heartbeat started to speed up as he realized that he was really going to die here. There was nothing he could do against monsters like these. He was already too weak to handle a single disaster class on his own, and now there were 2 aiming straight for him. What sort of situation is this? Move out of the way! A shout from the side reached Lightning Rider only a few seconds before a great force slammed into the 2 monsters that were about to hit him, throwing them to the side. Another superhuman, Blizzard Force, was the one that helped Lightning Rider. The new superhuman was a B-rank female with blue hair and white highlights in her hair. Her white eyes were glowing as she raised her staff in the air and summoned a massive storm that darkened the sky above them. Her power was focused on the weather, and she had the ability to use various wind and lightning-based skills because she also had a minor blessing from the god of lightning. Lightning streaked across the sky as she conjured up a massive lightning bolt and sent it straight into the direction of the 2 monsters. BZZZED. The lightning bolt struck them head-on, and blue light flashed across the entire area as the massive skill hit them. But as it died down, Blizzard could only take a step back in fear as she saw that the lightning bolt didn't even do anything to them. They were still on their feet, and the only difference between now and before the lightning bolt hit was that their focus was no longer on Lightning Rider. It was on her. Roar! I'm telling you guys, Ghost has to be the coolest superhuman in the world. Did you see him on Matub the other day? He finished off that disaster-class monster like it was nothing, and he didn't even stay back to take an interview. That's so cool. Mark walked into the school cafeteria with his hands in his pocket. Eric was following behind him while looking through some of the books that they were assigned to read today, and Mark had to pull her out of the way whenever she was about to hit someone or something for not paying attention to where she was going. Mark pulled out of the way before she hit a table, and he guided her towards their table as he heard what someone was shouting. He looked in the direction of the person talking, and he saw that it was Francis and his crew who were sitting together around a table and talking loudly. Francis was holding onto a phone and watching a video on Matube of a fight that was happening, and once Mark saw it, he immediately recognized the fight. That was the fight that Mark had with a large disaster-class monster a month ago. It was a lion-human hybrid that showed up near the mall, and since Mark was in the area, he decided to kill the monster before it could do too much damage. Mark had no idea that someone was videotaping him when he was fighting. He couldn't believe people were willing to risk their life like that just to get a video to put up on Matube. That's so cool. I bet he doesn't even use his full strength to fight this monster. Look how he was just handling it with nothing but his hands. The person who said this was Francis, and Mark felt some amusement bubble up from his chest as he heard it. Everyone in school knew that Francis was a large supporter of Ghost. If there was even a single person who liked Ghost more than Francis, then no one has seen that person yet. Ghost was the prime definition of what a fanboy was. He watched all of Ghost's videos, and he even bought all the merchandise that some illegal retailers made for Ghost. That is why Mark was a little amused by Francis whenever he and Francis were confronting each other. What would Francis think if he knew that the person he looked up to so much was actually Mark? Francis would probably spit blood in anger before denying it to his last breath. Hey, did you also see the previous fight he had? He doesn't use any skills at all, and I haven't seen him summon any beasts since he started fighting. I think he can only fight using his hand and his super strength. That just makes it cooler. I wonder what sort of blessing he has that gives him strength like that. If he uses all of his strength, then he'll probably be the physically strongest man in the world. Francis said this with a look of excitement on his face as Mark and Eric finally found a place to sit down. The other people that were at Francis' table all started to argue with him about how there were a lot of other superhumans out there that were far stronger than Ghost, and he shouldn't call Ghost the physically strongest without any proof. No one had ever seen Ghost before, and he wasn't a part of any of the guilds, so there was no way to measure him against some of the other superhuman brawlers. Mark knew that they were all right. He wasn't even close to the physically strongest in the world. A high-ranking A-class like Yellow Phantom could probably beat him in a physical battle easily. Mark was just a human who was using his super strength to fight monsters, and he wouldn't have a chance against strong superhumans who still had their blessings. Oof! A small grunt came from below Mark, and Mark looked down to see that he had bumped into a girl as she was passing with her tray of food. The girl that he bumped into was Esmeralda, and Francis immediately sighed inwardly as Esmeralda frowned, and she looked up at him in anger. She didn't pour her food, but she had almost fallen over from a hit just now. Can't you look where you're going, you tall loaf? I almost fell over and threw my food away. Esmeralda shouted in anger at the much taller Mark, and Mark just smiled kindly and apologized. He actually made a mistake by not noticing her when she was passing, because she was just so small and short that he couldn't help it. Even now, the size difference between the two of them is almost laughable. It felt like Esmeralda was a child trying to reprimand her father. Mark had to force himself to keep a straight face as she kept on glaring up at him. Hey, what the hell are you doing to Esmeralda? Mark sighed inwardly as the one person he didn't want to get involved with stood up from his seat and started coming towards them. Francis stormed towards them with an intense glare on his face, and Mark just turned around and stared at him in annoyance as Francis came to stand right in front of Mark's face. Mark felt like smacking Francis across the face, but he just settled for glaring at him. What the hell do you want? You don't have to involve yourself in every situation just because you see me there. People will start to misunderstand and think you're interested in me in the wrong ways. Mark said this to Francis, and Francis clicked his tongue as he felt like spitting blood from the disgusting image that was put in his head. Francis was not going to allow Mark to get away from being punished this time. He was already angry because of the whole situation that happened on the road earlier, and now that this happened, he finally found the perfect chance to beat the hell out of Mark. So, you want to fight me? Do you think you'll survive against me? I've had training right from when I was a kid to take down people 3 times my size. You think you can take me on just because you go to the gym a few times a week? Francis tried to rile Mark up with these words, and he hoped that Mark would take in bait and agree to fight. Francis' hero was Ghost, and he was a fan of how Ghost managed to handle monsters that were 2 or 3 times his size using nothing but his hands. Francis would do the same things to this fool and show him that he is better than him. Mark could only stare down at Francis with a look of disbelief in his eyes. Francis had no idea what he was getting himself into here. Mark was someone who always held himself back from acting rashly because he knew he could cause serious damage if he didn't control his strength. But sometimes, things like this would make him want to just smack someone without thinking about the consequences. Some people deserve a good beating for doing stupid things without thinking. Hey, that's enough. Can't you see you're blocking the road? Just let it go. A voice shouted from beside the 2 boys, and Mark looked at Erit as she walked up to them with a look of anger on her face. Erit knew that if she left things as they are now, they would blow out of proportion for no reason. She only wanted to eat and get out of here, and she didn't want any trouble. She glared at Francis as she came close enough before she took Mark's hand and told him to come with her. Before she could go anywhere, though, Francis pushed her away from them and made her stumble back. He raised his hand to try and smack her. What do you think you're doing, bitch? This doesn't concern. Grab! Exclamation point. Francis suddenly felt his heart stop as someone grabbed his hand, and he felt his bone creak under the intense pressure that he could feel on his wrist. Francis turned around quickly, took in a shuddering breath, and stepped back when Mark's wide eyes gazed into his own. Mark looked like a killer at that moment. Mark was completely pissed. Not only did Francis push Erit, but he had the audacity to raise his hand at her. Who did he think he was? Mark now understood that he's been too lenient with Francis all this time. It is because Mark has never done anything to punish the fool that he thinks he can raise his hand at Erit and get away with it. Clench. Hey. Hey, let go of me already. Let go, damn it. Hey, stop tightening your hand. I said let go, you bastard. That fucking hurts. Francis started to shout more frantically as he felt intense pain in his hand. What sort of grip strength is this? It felt like someone was using a metal clamp to press against his hand. Both Esmeralda and Erit could only watch in shock as they saw the pained look on Francis' face and the blank apathy that Mark was showing. Erit knew that Mark had always been holding himself back from attacking Francis because of her. They have had too many conflicts, and the only reason why they haven't fought till now was because she was always intervening before things could get too far. But she didn't know if she would be able to stop Mark this time, and she didn't know if she should stop him. Maybe Francis deserves to finally get a beating for the nonsense he always did. Francis knew that at this rate, Mark would break his wrist in front of the whole school. The pressure Mark was applying just kept increasing, and it didn't look like Mark had any intentions of stopping at all. That would be too embarrassing. Who the fuck does Mark think he is? Does he really think there would be no consequences if he goes too far? Francis will make sure Mark never knows peace in this city again. Francis immediately prepared himself to strike back at Mark. What the hell is that? The sky is turning black. Someone suddenly shouted from in front of the window, and everyone turned towards it in shock to see what he was pointing at. The sky above the city was turning dark, and there was lightning striking across the horizon as a great dust cloud rose from near the docks. There was no need for them to know exactly what was happening over there. Everyone could immediately tell that they were witnessing a superhuman battle happening right before their eyes. We need to get out of here. Run. Run away right now. The bunkers. The teachers said we should get to the bunkers. Wait. I left my Me phone in class. I need to get it. Just leave it behind. It isn't more important than your life. Yes, it is. That's the gold-plated Me phone 22. You can't buy it even if you sell your kidney. The people in the cafeteria were shouting like this as they scrambled out of the hall. They did not waste any time as they realized the gravity of the situation, and all of them gradually began to run away. They knew that even though they were very far away from the battle, there was a chance that it could get close to them and reach the school. They have lived in this world with the dangers of anima and the superhumans for too long for them not to understand how serious things were. Warning! Warning! This is a general broadcast to all citizens. There is a battle ongoing in your vicinity, and all citizens are advised to find shelter or evacuate from the area. This is not a drill. All citizens are advised to find shelter or evacuate from the vicinity. The danger level is Calamity Class. This is not a drill. A loud broadcast echoed through the loudspeakers all over the city, and all the students in the cafeteria immediately started to pick up their pace as they ran out the door to try and get to the school bunker as quickly as possible. The city broadcast is only used whenever there is a monster that cannot be beaten immediately by superhuman, and all the citizens would be told to evacuate so that the superhumans can fight without worrying about their safety. If this was only a simple disaster class monster, then the city would not have sent out the warning because the superhumans would be able to deal with the monster without causing too much damage. The broadcast has never been used in the city before unless it was a drill, and this is the first time that a Calamity Class would appear in City A. The mere fact that the broadcast was not a drill put fear and anxiety into the hearts of all the citizens. All over City A, citizens were evacuating from their homes, and they were either moving to safe houses or they were going towards the main road so they could leave the city completely. Thankfully, the Nature Academy built a large bunker in the underground basement of the school a long time ago, and they educated all the students about how to evacuate into the bunker whenever there was an anima attack. All the students immediately followed the teacher's instructions and began to move down to the bunker to hide. Some of them were calling their parents and friends, but there wasn't a single person who wanted to stay up there. Ring, ring, ring. Mark felt his phone ringing in his pocket, but he ignored it because he already knew who it was. It was definitely Pat, who was calling him about the attack that they just announced. Hey, let go already. There's a fucking attack on the city. Do you want us to die? If you want to die, then go and die alone and leave me out of it. Let go. Francis shouted anxiously as he looked around and saw everybody running towards the bunker. Mark was still holding on to Francis' hand, and Francis was getting more worried that Mark would hold him here until the monster reaches this school. Mark was going to get them all killed. Forget this. You boys are always acting stupid. Esmeralda shouted this as she abandoned her food and ran out of the cafeteria with the other students. She had been waiting for Francis, but once she saw that Mark was refusing to let go, she just left. There is no way she would allow herself to die for their stupid, dick-measuring contest. Esmeralda was the whole reason why the conflict began in the first place, but she didn't care about that, and she just abandoned Francis. Will Francis' money matter if he is dead? He needs to be more sensible. Mark glared harder at Francis. He still wanted to break this bastard's hand, but he knew that there were more important things to do right now. And Mark, let's go. We have to go down to the bunker before they close it. Eric quickly moved to Mark and grabbed his hand as she tried to drag him with her towards the bunker. Mark slowly let go of Francis, and Francis rubbed his wrist in pain as he quickly followed the crowd of students. But Francis couldn't help himself from glaring at Mark one last time before leaving. This was not over. Mark and Eric started moving down the hallway, and Mark knew that he couldn't go with Eric to the basement. His phone was still ringing, and there was no doubt that it was Pat who was calling him. There were hundreds of students boxing them in from all sides in the hallway, and Mark knew that he could use this to his advantage. The number of students was so large that Aerith would never notice if he left her hand and allowed her to just keep going on her own. Mark slowly used the force of the students around him and let go of Aerith's hand. He allowed many students to move in front of him, and he slowly disappeared backward into the crowd as he began moving in the opposite direction from where Aerith was moving. Immediately after he left Aerith's hand, Aerith immediately noticed that there was no contact anymore, and she turned around in shock to try and find him. She glanced around the entire hallway and tried to make some of the students move out of the way so that she could find Mark, but there was no sign of him. A great amount of anxiety started to rise from inside Aerith, and she was scared that she left Mark behind. She immediately wanted to go and find him, but the sheer number of students was preventing her from moving as they continued dragging her towards the basement by force. "Mark, where are you? Mark, has anybody seen Mark?" Aerith continued to shout like this loudly, but her voice was drowned out by the shouts and murmurs from all the other students who were also looking for their friends. Aerith felt tears come to her eyes as she didn't see Mark, and she didn't want to think that he somehow got into trouble somewhere. She was sure that he would keep going to the bunker. He has to be there. Aerith could only think in this way as she was slowly guided towards the bunker against her will. System functions resuming. System functions resuming. System functions resuming. Mark made his way past the students who were running towards the bunker and finally picked up his phone when it rang again. "What the hell is going on there? I can see 5 different monsters on the CCTV, and one of them is a country-level calamity. They are fighting together." "What?" Mark was extremely surprised by the last thing that Pat just said. What did he mean by the monsters were fighting together? Ever since the Armageddon class anima 4 years ago, there hasn't been a single instance where monsters fought together or followed a leader. They were all mindless creatures that just knew how to destroy. Mark shook his head as he reached his classroom and quickly prepared to join the fight. He put his phone in his pocket and took out his AirPods to connect them, so he could keep talking to Pat. He then took off his shirt, leaving himself in only his inner singlet, and he grabbed a mask from his bag and placed it over his head before using it to cover his lower face. This was how Mark always fought, and he liked the anonymity that came with hiding his identity. Mark jumped through the window and began to race across the city at an immense speed. Zoom! Mark was so focused on trying to get to the scene of the fight that he didn't even notice that there was a light ping, ringing in his ear over and over again. This pinging sound was from his system, and it was sending him many messages. Does the user wish to activate the system? Yes/no. Does the user wish to activate the system? Yes/no. Does the user wish to activate the system? Yes/no. If no choice is picked, system functions cannot resume. The system will move into standby mode until an option is picked. Standby mode activated. Mark could already see the giant smoke rising from the docks, and he jumped into the sky from on top of a building and soared through the air as he got closer to the docks. From up here, Mark could see everything that was happening at the docks, and he couldn't believe how crazy it was. There were many superhumans, and they were all trying their best to fight against 5 monsters with fish heads that were destroying everything in their path. The superhumans, there were mainly C and B ranks, and so they had to fight in groups of more than 5 before they could even stand a chance against the fish-headed monsters. But that wasn't the craziest fight that was happening. The worst fight happening was between a humanoid-looking anima with an ant head and 2 superhumans. Mark immediately recognized one of the 2 superhumans as Lightning Rider, whom he saw earlier today, and the other superhuman was Yellow Phantom, who fought against the monster yesterday. Mark had a big choice to make. Should he go and help out the B ranks that were struggling against the fish-headed anima, or should he join the 2 superhumans that were fighting against the ant-headed anima? Mark only thought about this for a split second, and he immediately came to a conclusion as he contorted his body and allowed himself to start moving towards the 2 superhumans that were fighting against the ant-headed monster. Don't do anything rash. That's a calamity, Mark. You can't win against something like that. You should try to help the other superhumans instead. Pat's annoyed voice rang through Pat's ear, and Mark just ignored him as he continued, making his way towards the fight. What did Pat expect him to do? He couldn't just leave them there to fight against something like that on their own. Yellow Phantom is only a low-level A rank, and Lightning Rider is AB rank. They had no chance of winning, and it would be better for three of them to fight it together. Tilda was breathing heavily as she looked at the giant ant-headed anima that was just staring at them with a bored expression in its eyes. It was like the anima was saying that they weren't even worth its time. She was already on her last leg as she could feel her stamina dwindling, and she knew that Lightning Rider was also on his last leg. He was even worse than she was because he had an injury on his shoulder that wouldn't stop bleeding. They had to get out of this somehow. The three of them were standing on top of the broken half of a building that was leaning precariously to one side. With only the smallest movement, Tilda knew that the entire building would teeter and fall over like a stack of dominoes. But what the hell are they going to do in this situation? They already called for backup, but there hasn't been a single sign of anyone coming to help them. Even the other B ranks were busy trying to take care of the other disaster class anima. They were definitely going to die here. Whoosh! A loud sound of something falling echoed through the air, and Tilda didn't even have time to turn around before something big and heavy slammed into the side of the ant-headed anima. Boom! Tilda felt her eyes widen in shock as she saw the anima get thrown across the building as it was blindsided, and a person landed in front of her and Lightning Rider. Mark narrowed his eyes at where the ant-headed anima was thrown towards, and he prepared himself for a fight. He only managed to get a lucky hit once, and he knew that the monster would never allow something like that to happen again. He looked to the side, and he saw that Lightning Rider was bleeding from his shoulder. You should get that closed up before you bleed to death. Having an injury in a fight like this is only going to make you a liability. Mark said this to Lightning Rider, and he watched as Lightning Rider narrowed his eyes in annoyance. Lightning Rider was curious about who the hell Mark was because of how Mark was covering his lower face to prevent them from knowing his identity. Tilda was far less confused, and she immediately knew who Mark was. She could recognize him from some of the videos that she used to watch on YouTube. This was Ghost. He was a vigilante-type superhuman who went around helping people with a mask to prevent them from knowing his identity. Tilda knew that he did all of his vigilante work in this region, but she didn't think that he would come out to help them like this since they were in the open and they were going to be reporters soon. Tilda wanted to ask him what he was doing here, but she knew that it would be a stupid question. It was obvious that he came here to help them, and it would be stupid for her to refuse his help. We're going up against a calamity, so we should try to come up with a plan. I don't think any of us has enough power to face it head on, so we will try to buy as much time as possible for more ranks to come. They are coming from another city, so it will take a while even at their top speed. If we can drag the fight away from the city, then that would be an ideal situation. Let's make it go back towards the docks. We're going up against a calamity, so we should try to come up with a plan. I don't think any of us has enough power to face it head on, so we will try to buy as much time as possible for more ranks to come. They are coming from another city, so it will take a while even at their top speed. If we can drag the fight away from a city, then that would be an ideal situation. Let's make it go back towards the docks. Tilda said this calmly while glaring in the direction of the ant-headed anima, and Mark just nodded to her as he prepared for the fight. Mark was glad that Tilda wasn't going to be asking any silly questions. At least, he wouldn't have to start explaining pointless things when they are about to fight for their lives. I have the most stamina right now, so I should take the front. I'll get its attention, and then one of you can deal a blow for a blind spot while it's distracted with me. Mark added some of his own thoughts, and Tilda couldn't deny that it was the best course of action right now. Her stamina was almost completely gone, so Mark taking the front line would help her to get some of it back. And since she was fast, she could rush in and attack the monster before rushing out again to make the monster confused. Lightning Rider still had a look of distrust on his face as he stared at Mark. He could not tell who Mark was, and due to the fact that his voice was distorted by the mask he was wearing, Lightning Rider couldn't tell how old he was either. Lightning Rider was the sort of person who hated mysteries, and he liked to have all the facts about anyone that he was going to be trusting his back to. If this were a different situation, then Lightning Rider would have definitely refused help from Mark because he didn't trust him, but since Tilda was already on board, Then Lightning Rider had no choice but to silently accept Mark's help. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat-a. A loud sound suddenly came from above the three superhumans, and Mark looked up to see that there was a news helicopter hovering right over them. Are these people completely mad? Why would they bring something like that to the scene of a fight? The helicopter was quite high in the sky, but Mark knew that a constraint like that was nothing for them. In the middle of a fight, they could easily reach that helicopter with just a single leap. Crack! Crack! Boom! Screech! Mark didn't have any time to start thinking about the stupidity of humans anymore, as he was forced to focus back on the ant-headed anima as it burst its way out from inside the building and released a loud screech that shook the ground under their feet for miles. Everything in the area felt the raw power from the anima, and Mark prepared himself for the beating that he knew he was about to receive. Mark has never fought against a calamity class before. The strongest opponent he has ever had was a disaster class, and that was nothing compared to this. Mark brought his fists up and dashed forward. He was going to try and catch the monster off guard, so that Tilda and Lightning Rider would have a good chance to attack with a surprise attack. Slam! But before Mark could even go anywhere, everybody was shocked as the Calamity class moved first at a speed that was 3 times faster than what it was using when fighting against Tilda and Lightning Rider. The Calamity class completely ignored everybody else in the area, and it slammed straight into Mark and dragged him along as the two of them flew through 3 skyscrapers and went deeper into the city. Exclamation point. Tilda's eyes were wide in shock, and she didn't even need to look to see that Lightning Rider was also shocked by what just happened. They have never seen an anima act in this way before. The anima were seen as mindless creatures whose only goal in life was to destroy as much of the world as possible while killing everyone and anyone that they could lay their hands on. There has never been a case where anima just ignored everyone else and went straight for one person. We have to help him. I don't know what is going on, but there is no way he can survive against that monster on his own. If we don't go, then he'll die. Tilda shouted this to Lightning Rider as she snapped out of her surprise, and Lightning Rider nodded his head as he covered his body in lightning, and they both dashed towards the direction where the Calamity class dragged Mark. Up in the sky, the news crew was also stunned as the helicopter followed after them. The journalist in the helicopter was a beautiful woman with red hair and green eyes. She had full red lips and a moderate bust that showed some cleavage through her shirt. She was holding a microphone and talking rapidly as the camera followed the destruction that the Calamity class was causing on the ground. This is something that I've never seen before in my life. It looks like the Calamity class is no longer interested in any of the other superhumans, and it has only decided to focus on one of them. Reports I am getting from my analysts are saying that the superhuman the Calamity is focusing on is the vigilante superhuman Ghost. He is a superhuman who has been involved in many disaster class subjugations, but we have never been able to get a good look at his fighting style before because of how elusive he is. But it seems like we'll finally get a good look at it today. In the underground bunker below Nature Academy, all of the students were huddled together as they tried to calm their beating hearts. They could all hear the tremors and destruction that was happening above ground. And even though the fight was happening far away from them, they could tell that there was an insane amount of power being thrown around up there. The superhuman Ghost is trying his best to get the Calamity class off him, but the Calamity class has not given him any room to regroup with the other superhumans. At this rate, it looks like he is going to have to find a way out of the situation himself. The superhumans Yellow Phantom and Lightning Rider are both chasing after the fighting pair, but it seems that no matter what they do, the Calamity class only continues to focus all of its attention on Ghost. There was a large television positioned above the ground where the news was playing, and everyone in the underground bunker stayed very silent as they watched the fight that was happening. Francis was watching the fight with wide eyes as he saw his idol being targeted by the Calamity class. Francis knew that Ghost was strong, but even Francis couldn't be sure that Ghost would make it out of a fight like this. A Calamity class attack has never happened in this city before, so no one was sure what the outcome would be. The only person who didn't look like she was interested in the fight at all was Aerith. Erit was the only person on her feet, and she had been frantically looking around for Mark ever since she came into the bunker. The only person who didn't look like she was interested in the fight at all was Erit. Erit was the only person on her feet, and she was frantically looking around for Mark ever since she came into the bunker. Mark! Mark, where are you? Has anyone seen Mark? I can't find him anywhere. Teacher, I haven't seen Mark anywhere. Erit ran up to one of the male teachers that were standing at the side, and she shouted that she still hadn't seen Mark, but the teacher just rubbed the back of his neck in slight irritation as a new tremor shook the ground under their feet. Even though he was a teacher, he was still a normal human being, and he didn't want to leave the bunker either just because there was a single student who could still be out there. He wasn't going to risk his life like that. I'm sure he's fine. Don't worry about it too much. Just sit down. You're bothering the other students that are trying to watch the news. The teacher said this to Erit, and Erit felt a great surge of anger fill her heart as she glared at the teacher and turned away from him. She should have known that the teacher wouldn't be any help at all. He was just a damn coward. Erit continued to shout Mark's name while asking everyone if they had seen her friend, but no one was able to help her because they hadn't seen Mark yet, and no one wanted to go out of the bunker just to try and look for him. Erit kept on shouting for Mark, and some of the students started telling her to keep quiet and sit down because she was preventing them from seeing what was playing on the television properly. Mark was probably somewhere else, and he couldn't hear her, so she should just keep quiet. Erit ignored all those people, and she kept on looking around frantically for Mark. A lot of fear came into her heart as images of Mark's dead or injured body were playing in her head. What if Mark was out there in the school, and he was trapped under a rock that fell? There have been a lot of tremors recently, and the tremors might have made something fall on him. There were still some students coming into the bunker, and Erit ran toward the entrance to look around to see if Mark was a part of them. But as the students entering the bunker started to reduce, Erit's fears began to increase as she realized that Mark was not part of them. There is no way. Mark wouldn't miss the bunker without a good reason. Mark knows how dangerous it is out there. That could only mean that Mark was in trouble, and he couldn't come because of something big. He was in danger. The teacher in charge of controlling the bunker door made sure that there were no more students coming in, and he nodded as he pressed the button to close the bunker door. The bunker door was automatic, so once it closed, it wasn't going to open anymore until the school was certain that the danger had passed. There was food and drinks in the bunker along with enough ventilation pipes to make sure that the students could stay there for more than a week if they needed to. Hey, what do you think you're doing? The doors are already closing. Get back here right now. The teacher suddenly shouted this as he saw Erit run out of the door right before it closed completely. What the hell was she doing? Couldn't she tell what sort of situation this was? She could die out there if the fighting gets to this area. Many of the male teachers quickly tried to see if they could hold the door open, and one of the female teachers tried to press the button to make sure it stayed open. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't keep it open, and it shut and locked them in while locking Erit outside. She's going to die out there. What in the world was she thinking? One of the female teachers shouted like this as she started to make a call to the authorities so that the police could come and get Erit out of the school. No one can leave the bunker until the danger passes, so the only thing that they can do is hope that the authorities can help her. The fight between Ghost and the Calamity class has now crossed into the eastern side of the city. Ghost is trying his best to hold his own against this unbelievable monster, but from the looks of things, he is not faring very well. It will not be long now before things go from bad to worse if reinforcements do not arrive soon. The reporter on the news channel shouted this, and the teachers and students all looked up at the television in shock. Their school was located on the eastern side of the city. That meant that there was a very high chance that the fight would reach their school very soon. The teacher who called the authorities turned off her phone with a sigh after she got another automatic message from the answering machine telling her to try again later. There was no chance that the authorities would come here anymore since the fight was already reaching this side of the city. Even if they answered her, it would take hours for them to send their people to rescue survivors. The only thing that the teachers could do was hope that Erit managed to stay alive long enough for someone to come and save her. What the hell is your fucking problem with me? Boom. Mark sent a left hook straight at the ant-headed anima, and he had to bite his inner lip in pain as his wrist almost broke from how fucking hard the ant-headed anima's skull was. Is this shit made out of fucking metal? There was no visible effect on the anima, and it grabbed Mark by the head and spun around before tossing him down through 10 floors of skyscraper. Boom, 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 boom. Mark shouted in pain as his back burned from the intense force. But he didn't allow the pain to stop him. Once he landed, he quickly grabbed a metal pole that was lying at the side and aimed it at the ceiling while waiting for just the right moment. Boom, roar, throw. At the exact moment that the ant-headed anima burst through the ceiling, Mark threw the pole like a javelin straight for it. Mark knew that his throwing strength was nothing to scoff at. Mark could throw a javelin with enough force to make it travel for more than 3 kilometers easily. If all that force is put into one throw, then Mark knew that he could impale a block of solid metal with his javelin throw. But Mark's eyes widened in shock as the metal pole that he threw with all his strength bent and crumpled as it couldn't even pass through the ant-headed anima's skin. Slam! Slam! The anima ignored the useless iron pole and grabbed Mark by the shirt, slamming him into the ground. It brought him up and turned around before throwing Mark through the wall of the skyscraper. Crash! They were on the 20th floor, so Mark was sent flying into the air without any place to land. Mark floated in the air, wondering what he could do about a monster like this. Why in the world was it attacking him alone? There were more than 20 superhumans here, and the ant-headed monster was ignoring all of them and going straight for him. In fact, it was even ignoring all the people they saw. Mark thought that he would have to be protecting people as they fought, but there was no need because the only person that the ant-headed anima was interested in was Mark. Mark turned to the side and saw a streak of lightning running across buildings and coming towards his location at an insane speed. He immediately knew that it was Lightning Rider and Yellow Phantom coming to help him. If he could just hold on for a few more seconds, then they could reach him and get this bastard off his back. Mark didn't know why the ant-headed anima was so focused on killing him, but he knew that if the 3 of them worked together, they could hold it off until reinforcements arrived. Mark, focus! A voice shouted from Mark's ear, and Mark was brought back to the fight as a shadow fell over him. Mark's eyes widened as he looked into the sky and saw that the ant-headed anima was holding onto a large section that it had broken off from the skyscraper. This bastard was trying to throw a house at him. Mark looked around in desperation and tried to see if there was anything that he could use to defend himself, but there was no place for him to use as leverage to get out of the way. He was literally a sitting duck as he fell from the sky. Screech! Whoosh! The building was thrown at Mark with a loud screech, and Mark could only cross his hand in front of his face and hope for the best. Slam! Boom! The building slammed into Mark with intense force, and a great tremor passed through the entire city as both Mark and the building crashed into the ground. There were miniature earthquakes generated by the impact, and this caused some of the buildings in the area to begin crumbling and falling. Screech! The ant landed on top of the building with Mark under it and screeched loudly as it released even more of its power. A large wave of energy spread across the city, freezing all the humans in place and making all the superhumans shiver from the oppressiveness of the power. This was the strength of a calamity-class monster. This was something that could not be handled by mere A ranks. This was a true monster. All the people in the world who were watching the news were silent as they saw the extraordinary display of strength that the Calamity class just showed them. It was something that they couldn't even comment on. Even the reporter who was in charge of providing commentary on the news was completely silent as she just watched the Calamity class screeching in victory. There was a dread that filled all of them as they didn't see Ghost moving anymore. It was finally sinking in for them that what they were watching was something that they could not even fathom. Ghost has always won against any monster he faced, and even though he was very elusive and didn't give any interviews or join any guilds, he was still loved by many because he was always protecting them. But there was no way Ghost would be able to survive against a monster like this. He was no longer even moving, so they were sure he was dead. Under the rubble, Mark was no longer moving as the weight of the building on top of him threatened to crush him. He could only think that he was going to die here, because there was no way he could win against something like this. Mark's life slowly began to flash before his eyes, and there was only one thought that constantly played over and over in his head. I wish I kissed Eric when I had the chance this morning. If Mark knew that he was going to be fighting against a monster that was hell-bent on killing him by any means necessary, then Mark would have just bit the bullet and kissed Eric. How the fuck can he die without even kissing her once? Ping, ping, ping. Mark blinked in surprise as he heard a pinging coming from somewhere inside his head. That sound. Mark knew that sound. He hadn't heard that sound in almost 4 years, but he could still remember the pinging sound that could only come from his system. Mark's heart was beating at a mile a minute as he quickly opened the tab that he closed earlier today and saw all the different messages that he missed. System functions recovering. Time elapsed. 4 years. 1 day. 10 hours. 32 minutes. 15 seconds. Time remaining. 0. Cannot awaken system. System functions are being recalibrated. System functions are being recalibrated. System awakening. Awakening complete. Does the user wish to activate the system? Yes/no. Does the user wish to activate the system? Yes/no. Does the user wish to activate the system? Yes/no. If no choice is picked, system functions cannot resume functions. The system will move into standby mode until an option is picked. Standby mode activated. After these messages passed, some new messages started to come up below them. User has suffered major physical damage. Estimated probability of winning the battle in the current state, 1.2%. System has concluded that this is an unattainable task. Due to the gravity of the situation, standby mode has been automatically deactivated. System functions restarting. System function restarting. System functions restarting. Superhero system restarted successfully. Mark felt a massive surge of energy fill him as the system finally came back online. And Mark couldn't stop the mad grin that spread across his face as each cell in his body radiated extreme power. Mark felt like he could take on the entire world in his current state. And he would win. Parsing Constitution. No residual damage found. Hello once again, Mark Vanitas. Has it already been 4 years? Exclamation point. Mark blinked in surprise and looked down in shock as he saw that he was no longer under the building. He looked around him, and he saw that he was standing in a bright blue area in the sky. There was no ground under him, but when he stomped his feet, he could feel solid ground under it. You don't want to do that. You could fall from there and head straight back down. I don't know about you, but I think a fall like that will definitely end with your death. Mark stopped stomping immediately when he heard this, and he looked up to see a boy floating in front of him. The boy was wearing blue shorts and a red shirt, and he had a cap over his white hair. This was Sozin, the god of games. Mark stopped stomping immediately when he heard this, and he looked up to see a boy floating in front of him. The boy was wearing blue shorts and a red shirt, and he had a cap over his white hair. This was Sozin, the god of games. It's you. I didn't think I would ever get to see you again while I was alive. It's been 4 years already. Mark could only smile happily as he said this, and Sozin laughed in that jovial way that Mark could still remember from 4 years ago. Sozin was floating in the air, and he spun around erratically in a playful manner while chuckling to himself. It has already been 4 years, but everything still felt the same about Sozin. Mark might have felt like it was a long time, but to Sozin, it might as well have only been a second. Sozin has lived too long to consider 4 years as any time at all. 4 years to him was barely a moment. You're in a real mess right now, aren't you? I thought you had bad luck before, but now I can only think that you went behind my back and made a deal with the god of bad luck. You're right at the god of death's doorstep. Sozin laughed loudly as he said this, and he finally calmed down after a few seconds of this. Mark rolled his eyes because he knew that it was true. Both times that Mark has met the god of games, he's been right at death's doorstep, and it felt like there was some sort of angel of bad luck following Mark wherever he goes. Or maybe it was even the god of games himself that was the angel of bad luck. Mark could only think like this while chuckling to himself at the strange thought. He glanced at his system and smiled as he saw the System tab that showed all his stats. There were some more messages that started popping up as the stats stopped loading. System has detected high levels of strength within the user. The user was not idle during the 4-year break, and many stats have been improved. Recalibrating user stats to properly reflect the user's current state. Recalibrating 1%. Recalibrating 5%. Recalibrating 20%. Recalibrating 75%. Recalibrating 92%. Recalibrating 99%. Recalibration complete. Superhuman system. Name, Mark Vanitas. Race, human. Title, nil. Rank, a 1900/3000. Affiliation, true good. Unused stat points, 0. Unused skill points, 0. Strength, 750. Stamina, 600. Agility, 550. Durability, 400. Mana, 150. System stats are greatly unbalanced, and the user is advised to improve the lacking stat to ensure proper growth. Skill tree, full body constitution. This is a unique skill tree enabling the user to systematically enhance and fortify every aspect of their physical form, elevating strength and resilience to unprecedented levels. Current full body constitution, soldier and constitution, 1 out of 100. Soldier and constitution. This skill endows the user with the ability to enhance their physical strength to levels proportionate to that of a soldier ant, enabling them to exhibit power that is 10 times higher than their current physical capability. Mana circulation. Mana circulation is a skill enabling the user to enhance the efficiency of mana distribution throughout their body, optimizing energy flow for heightened senses and greater strength. Current mana circulation stage. F rank, 1 out of 100. Stat improvements due to application of mana. Strength, plus 2%. Stamina, plus 2%. Comment for God. Ha 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 ha. You're so weak. Due to the user's tenacious work ethic, the system has granted the user a gift. All hail the system. System gift. Stat points, plus 20. Skill points, plus 10. The user has gained a new title. He who perseveres through hell. He who perseveres through hell. The user never lost faith in the system through the 4 years of system shutdown. This shows great dedication and tenacity in the user. This title grants the user a 10% boost to all stats when a user is facing off against an opponent that is at least 1 rank higher than the user. When Mark finished reading all of this, he couldn't stop his heart from soaring in joy. He finally got his system back. He was no longer just an ordinary human, and he could now fight with his blessing. But there were a lot of things that Mark still didn't understand about his system, and he decided that he would have to ask Sozin about these things. The first thing that Mark found strange was the fact that he still had some of the skills that Sozin gifted him when he made a deal 4 years ago. Skills like full body constitution and mana circulation were not in the system when Mark first got them. They were just gifts that Sozin gave to Mark when Mark wanted to fight against the Armageddon class. So why were they still here? Don't tell me that Sozin was going to allow me to keep them. That was awesome. Mark was sure that when he got back his system, he would have to start from scratch again because Sozin said that all the power he gave him was only temporary, but starting from this point wasn't so bad at all. Mark then glanced at his rank, and he wondered what the numbers beside it meant. Mark was an A rank, but he had a counter that showed him how far he was away, FRM moving to the next rank. Was it some sort of addition of high skills? Mark asked Sozin about this, and Sozin floated around Mark and looked down at the system over Mark's shoulder as he said, I see you already saw the skills that you got from me. I thought about taking them away from you, but for some reason, I couldn't take them away. I know, it is strange to me too, but there are really things that even we gods are not capable of. The numbers beside your rank are from your stats. The addition of your 3 highest stats will determine how powerful you really are. So it's up to you to decide how you wish to distribute your stat points to grow stronger. Maybe you want to put everything into mana and become a mage, or maybe you want to add it all to durability so you can become as tough as a tank. It's all up to you, but remember that there are still restrictions. I'll leave you to figure those out yourself. You're my first and only champion, so I was surprised to find out that there are restrictions placed on me too. It looks like the system really likes you. But it seems that the system reset the skills you got back to their base state, so you'll have to grind them just like any other skill and make them grow and evolve. If you can do that, then good for you for getting some free skills. When the god of games said that he tried to take away the skill but couldn't, Mark was shocked. So there are some things that even gods couldn't do. Does that mean that the god of games was weaker than the system? Or maybe the system was just able to counteract some of the god of games' powers, so that he couldn't interfere too much. Mark was glad about this revelation because he knew that the god of games was a very eccentric person. Having someone as intense and crazy as the god of games as his patron god was already insane enough, but it would be even worse if the god of games could change anything and everything at his whim. That would be the worst possible situation. The god of games already told Mark that the only reason why humans were given so much power was for the entertainment of the gods. So Mark knew that Sozin would do crazy things just for his entertainment, if he could. I don't know why you have so much distrust for me. I haven't even done a single thing to harm you since giving you my powers. All I've done is help you as much as I could since the beginning. You should be a little more grateful to your patron god. Mark immediately noticed the playful tone that Sozin was using while talking, and he knew that Sozin was being sarcastic right now. Sozin wasn't the sort of god that denies his own nature. Sozin was the god of games, and he would do anything he wanted for his own entertainment without caring about whether MRK liked it or not. Hold on, did Sozin just read my mind? Mark's eyes suddenly widened in shock as he thought about this, and he looked towards Sozin quickly with an expression of surprise on his face. Sozin immediately started to laugh, even louder. You're only noticing now? I've been reading your mind from the very start. How else do you think I chose you to be my champion without having to talk to you at all? I chose you because of your mentality. You have the zeal that I am looking for in my champion. The zeal to be the strongest in the world. Do you really think that you are normal? If it were anyone else, they would have given up the moment they realized that they no longer had their blessing. But you didn't give up. Instead, you went to train your regular body, and you started fighting against monsters even without having anything to protect you. You're nothing like normal people, Mark. You're a battle freak with enough sense to go the distance. You love the rush of battle, and you crave strength. That is exactly what I want in my champion. You have to be the strongest in every world, so I can brag to the other gods that my champion is the best. Mark could only nod in silent acceptance of what Sozin said. Mark was a little put off by the fact that Sozin was reading all of his thoughts like an open book, but that wasn't the worst thing in the world when he really thought about it. Sozin was a god, and Mark was sure that there was a lot more that Sozin could do than what he was telling Mark. Mark would just have to learn to live with the fact that Sozin could read his mind. Mark already had the intention of being the strongest in the world, whether Sozin said anything about it or not. Mark was miserable these past few years because he knew that he was just one step away from power, and he had to give up most of it 4 years ago for the sake of saving the world. So this time Mark would not waste even a moment. How are you going to use the first gifts? Sozin floated around as he asked this, and Mark looked at the gift that his system gave him and wondered how he should distribute it. The skills that I have are pretty basic, but I can tell that they are strong. I was able to fight against an Armageddon class with only the maximum level of the Soldier Ant Constitution, so there is no way that it will be weak. I just need to build it up and then evolve it. But I think it will be more sensible to give the stat points to the mana stat since it is so low and give the skill points to the mana circulation skill, so I can improve my overall stats. The mana stat and mana circulation skill work together to improve my stats, so if I improve them, then I can have some extra power. Sozin hummed from his place in the sky as he floated around Mark with his legs crossed and his hands held behind his head. He heard everything that Mark just said, as well as Mark's thoughts, and it wasn't a bad deduction. Giving the skill and stat points to mana-based abilities would definitely help him improve all his other stats. But what was that nonsense he was saying about the Soldier Ant Constitution? Does he not know that the Soldier Ant Constitution is only the weakest constitution out of all the constitutions that he could have? I don't think you understand the extent of the power that you have right now. What I gave you before to fight against the Armageddon class was only the tip of the iceberg. It was all the power that I could give you at that time, due to your weak body, but don't think that it is your limit. You have power beyond mortal understanding, Mark. Don't underestimate how far you can go. Sozin hated the fact that Mark was looking down on the system that he had. Does Mark think that the system was only strong enough to fight off one Armageddon? Or does he think that because he fought off one Armageddon, he has already seen the extent of power that the system can produce? That was foolish thinking. There was a reason why the god of games chose Mark as his champion. Mark was going to be fighting against beings of godly power in the future, and without enough strength, Mark would be crushed like a bug. Sozin was not going to lose face with the other gods, because he had a weak champion. Mark was going to become the strongest in the world, whether he liked it or not. Are you trying to tell me that the Armageddon I fought against before was weak? I fought against that monster for 3 nights and 4 days, and we destroyed half of the North American continent. Can something like that even be called weak? Or are you trying to say that there are monsters even stronger out there? Mark couldn't even wrap his head around Sozin's statement. How can a monster like that, Armageddon, be called weak? Mark almost lost his life many times in the few days that he fought against the Armageddon, and if not for the endless mana that Mark's system gave him, then he would have definitely lost. You need to broaden your mind more, Mark Vanitas. The reason why you fought against that monster for so long wasn't because it was strong. It's because you were weak as shit. There are monsters beyond your imagination in this world. Do you think that Armageddon was strong? Wait till the next one comes. Mark felt his throat dry up as he heard this. The image of another Armageddon arriving on Earth was enough to bring back a lot of bad memories about the last battle. Mark just shook his head and turned back to the system as he began to distribute his points. He would try not to think about that for now, and he would just focus on gaining power as quickly as possible. Does the user wish to transfer 20 stat points to mana? Yes/no. Mark chose yes, and he felt a surge of energy fill his entire body as something began to flow from his chest toward every limb. Was this mana? It was exhilarating. Mark quickly went to send the other points to the skill he wanted to improve. Does the user wish to transfer 10 skill points to mana circulation? Yes/no. Mark chose yes again, and the surge of mana that was flowing erratically through his body suddenly became far more controlled. He could see that it was now more efficient, and there was less wasted movement as it flowed from his chest through the rest of his body. Once Mark sent the points to the stats, he saw another new prompt come up. Stats improvement due to application of mana. Strength, plus 4%. Stamina, plus 4%. As the mana surged through Mark's body, he could feel a slight increase in those two stats, and he was glad that he chose to add the points here as his entire body felt rejuvenated from the mana he gained. This will help him in the fight that he's going to go back into. At least, he was now sure that his strength would not lose against the strength of that Calamity class. Mark knew that his skills and stats were organized in a way that would make fighting with fists very easy. Mark didn't know if the god of games did this on purpose or if it was just a coincidence. But Mark didn't mind at all because he knew that he enjoyed fighting with his fists more than using a weapon. Mark was a brawler by nature,